She had exactly 40 minutes before her grandmother walked through those arrival doors, and zero husband to show for it. 2 years of lies. 2 years of, yes, Grandma, my husband is wonderful. 2 years of invented anniversaries, fake arguments, and a fictional man named Do Hyun who apparently loved her very much. And now the woman who raised her was landing at Incheon International Airport, expecting to finally meet him. Zuri Bennett stood in the middle of the busiest terminal in South Korea, her luggage at her feet, her pulse somewhere near her throat. And then she saw him. The wrong man. The most dangerous man. The only man. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it. The convoy arrived the way power always announces itself. Not loudly, but with the particular silence that clears space around it. 3 black SUVs, windows tinted to the edge of legality, moved through the restricted lane outside Terminal 1 at Incheon International Airport with the smooth authority of something that had never once been told to wait. Uniformed officers near the curb stepped back without being asked. A luggage handler pushing an overloaded cart changed direction mid-stride. Even the automated announcement speakers overhead seemed to pause. Inside the middle vehicle, Kang Do-hyun was not sleeping, though his eyes were almost closed. He had the particular stillness of a man who had learned long ago that rest was not something that happened in beds or on schedules. It was something you stole in increments, in the back of moving vehicles, in the 30 seconds between one crisis ending and the next one beginning. His suit was charcoal, expensive without advertising the fact, and his collar was open at the top button because he had pulled his tie loose somewhere over the yellow sea and had not bothered to fix it since. He was 35 years old and looked it in the way that soldiers look their age. Not worn out, but settled into something harder than youth. His second in command, a thick-necked man named Park Sung-jin, who everyone called just Park, watched him from the front passenger seat the way you watch a fire you're responsible for maintaining. Park had served Do-hyun for 11 years. He had seen him negotiate with 3 rival syndicate heads simultaneously, absorb a knife wound across the ribs without flinching, and sit through a 7-hour maritime tribunal without changing expression once. He had also watched Do-hyun spend the last 4 months walking through his own penthouse, like a man searching for something he'd misplaced and couldn't name. The convoy stopped. Park turned around. "We're at the private exit, sir. Vehicle is pre-cleared. We can be back in Seoul in under 2 hours." Do-hyun opened his eyes all the way for the first time in 40 minutes. The fluorescent lights of the terminal exterior filtered through the tinted glass and laid pale strips across his face. His jaw was set at the angle it always was when he was calculating something, and Park recognized that angle well enough to simply wait. "I want coffee," Do-hyun said. "Real coffee. Not whatever was on that plane." Park blinked. "There's a cafe in the main terminal." A beat of silence. Behind Park, the 2 bodyguards in the rear seats exchanged a glance so brief it barely qualified as a look. "Sir," Park said carefully, "Choi's people landed an hour ago. They may still be—" "I'm aware of where Choi's people landed." Do-hyun reached for the door handle. "Which is why I said the main terminal. They won't look for me in a place I have no reason to be." It was, Park had long ago accepted, impossible to argue with the man's logic without also arguing with the decade of it being correct. He got out of the vehicle first, scanned the immediate area with the practiced efficiency of someone whose entire professional existence was devoted to standing between Do-hyun and consequences, and then opened the rear door. Do-hyun stepped out into the noise and recycled air of Incheon at midday and breathed it in like it was something worth keeping. The main terminal at Incheon during peak international hours was a specific kind of controlled chaos. The kind that looks like order from the right distance, but is actually hundreds of separate urgencies moving in parallel. Families with too much luggage and not enough hands. Business travelers walking fast and looking at phones. Tour groups trailing laminated signs. The air smelled like coffee and jet fuel. And the particular chemical sweetness of duty-free perfume that had been sprayed too many times near open ventilation. Do-hyun moved through it with Park 2 steps behind and the other 2 bodyguards flanking at a distance, all of them in the same charcoal dark civilian clothes that said security without saying it in any way that would alarm airport management. Do-hyun himself moved the way he always moved in public. Not quickly, but with the absolute certainty of someone who had never once wondered whether space would clear for him. It always did. He found the cafe near the International Arrivals Hall, ordered in Korean, and was standing at the end of the counter waiting when he felt it. A hand. On his arm. Not a brush. Not an accidental contact from a passing passenger losing their balance. A grip. Both hands, actually, fingers locking around his forearm above the wrist, with the particular strength of someone who was terrified and had run out of options at the same moment. He went very still. This was the stillness that preceded violence, the complete cessation of movement that every man who had ever worked for him or against him recognized as a warning. Park was already moving, one hand reaching. "Please," said a voice in English. American English specifically, with the flattened vowels of someone from somewhere northern and urban. "Please, I know this is insane. I know. I need you to listen to me for 30 seconds before your guys break my arms." Do-hyun looked down at the hands on his arm. They were shaking. Then he looked at the face of the woman they belonged to. She was Korean American by look, or mixed. He couldn't tell precisely, and it wasn't the point. 30, maybe, with dark eyes that were doing the particular thing eyes do when a person is fighting very hard not to cry in a public place and is currently losing that fight. She was dressed in a coral blazer over dark jeans, with a laptop bag slung across her body at an angle that suggested she had grabbed it and run. Her other hand was holding a phone, and on the screen, visible even at this angle, was an active flight tracker showing an arrival status for a Korean air flight from JFK that read, "Landed." She looked, in short, like someone for whom time had just run out. Park's hand was on her shoulder, not rough yet, but close. "Sir," Park said. Do-hyun raised 2 fingers. It was a minimal gesture. Park's hand withdrew. 30 seconds, Do-hyun said. His English was accented but precise, each word placed with the deliberate care of someone who had learned the language from people who did not tolerate imprecision. "Go." Her breath came out in a gust that was half relief and half panic. "My grandmother is on that flight. She's on a layover. She has 2 hours before she boards her connecting flight to Seoul City. She's coming to visit for the first time in 3 years. She's 74 years old. She has a heart condition that her doctor says is—" She stopped. Recalibrated. "She thinks I'm married. I told her I was married 2 years ago. I did it because she was sick, and she was scared, and she kept saying she was worried I would grow old alone, and I told her I had a husband. His name is Do-hyun. My husband's name is Do-hyun." She stopped again, and something very close to hysterical laughter moved across her face and vanished. "Which is insane, I know that. I know how that sounds." Do-hyun looked at her for a long moment. He picked up his coffee from the counter. "Your 30 seconds is gone," he said. "I need 40 minutes, she said. 40 minutes of your time. Just stand next to me and don't say anything that contradicts whatever I say. She's 74, and she has—" Her voice cracked, and she pressed it back down with visible effort. "She has maybe 2 good years left where she can travel. This is the last time I might ever see her at an airport. I can't let her spend it finding out that I've been lying to her since 2022. Please." Silence. Around them, the terminal continued its noise, indifferent. Park leaned in close to Do-hyun's ear. "Sir, we need to go." Do-hyun drank his coffee. It was, in fact, real coffee, the kind that had been made by someone who understood what coffee was for. He could feel the woman still holding his arm, not gripping anymore, but not letting go either, as if she understood that letting go would end the conversation, and she could not afford for the conversation to end. "What is your name?" he said. The woman blinked, like she hadn't expected the question. "Zuri. Zuri Bennett." "Zuri," he repeated, as if testing the weight of it. "And what is this husband's full name? The one you invented?" Her jaw tightened slightly. "Do-hyun. I told her his name was Kang Do-hyun." Somewhere behind him, one of the bodyguards made a sound that might have been a cough. Park's expression did not change because Park was a professional, but something moved through his eyes that Do-hyun recognized as extreme curiosity being held at arm's length by extreme discipline. Do-hyun set his coffee cup down on the counter. "Where did you say we met?" he said. Zuri's grip on his arm tightened again without her seeming to notice. "A bookstore. In Hongdae. You knocked over a stack of architecture books, and I helped you pick them up, and you asked me to dinner to say thank you." What is my job? I told her you're in international finance, private equity. He looked at her steadily. That is not entirely a lie. She stared at him. Something shifted in her face, not hope exactly, but the space where hope was about to appear. Park, Do-hyun said, without looking away from her. Sir, Park said, from a place that suggested he was already preparing for something he would regret. Tell the others to take the vehicles back to the private lot. I'll be 40 minutes. The silence that followed was the particular silence of four professional men absorbing something their professional experience had not previously equipped them for. Sir, Park said again carefully, are you, with respect, are you certain? She invented a husband named Kang Do-hyun, Do-hyun said, and something moved at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. And a grandmother is landing at gate 7. That is either extraordinary coincidence or a sign that I should drink better coffee in private. I choose to interpret it as the former. He turned to Zuri, who was looking up at him with an expression that sat precisely at the border between relief and the dawning horror of what she had just actually set in motion. One condition, he said. Anything, she said. You don't thank me. During, not in front of her. Husbands don't get thanked. Something flickered through her eyes. Okay. And you answer to whatever I call you. I won't know your grandmother's name for you, so if she uses it, answer. She calls me Zoo. Zoo. He said it once, neutrally. Then he straightened his collar, buttoned the top button of his shirt, and did not retie the tie because he decided a man in private equity on a Tuesday afternoon in an airport might reasonably have a loose tie. And this level of detail mattered to him in the way that every detail mattered to him, down to the level where it became useful rather than ornamental. Lead, he said, was Gate 7. In the International Arrivals Hall, sat at the end of a long corridor with a viewing area separated from the passenger flow by a low partition and the particular tension of people who are waiting for other people. There were perhaps 30 individuals clustered near the exit doors, most of them with the posture of anticipation, weight shifted forward, necks angled toward the door. A child near the barrier was holding a handmade sign in green marker that read, "Welcome home, Daddy," in letters of irregular sizes. Zuri walked next to Do-hyun with the stiff gait of someone who was trying very hard to walk naturally, and was therefore walking the least naturally she had walked in her adult life. She was aware of him in the physical way you become aware of something large and potentially dangerous occupying the same space as you. Not because he was broadcasting threat, but precisely because he wasn't. He had turned it off like a switch. The man who had stepped out of that convoy 20 minutes ago and made uniformed officers step back simply by existing was now walking beside her with his hands loose at his sides, moving at a pace calibrated to hers, not outpacing her, not crowding her, just present in the particular unhurried way of someone for whom being present is not an effort. It was, in the most inconvenient possible moment, compelling. Stop walking like you're approaching a gallows, he said quietly, in English, without looking at her. I'm not. Your shoulders are up around your ears. Drop them. She dropped them. Your jaw is tight enough to crack. I'm nervous. That is evident. Be nervous in a way that does not make your grandmother nervous. He paused. What does she know about me? Beyond the name and the job. She knows you're Korean. She knows we met at the bookstore. She knows we got married in a small ceremony 2 years ago in Seoul. She couldn't come because of her health. I told her we were going to do a bigger celebration when she was stronger. Zuri's voice stayed level through this recitation only by the kind of effort that has a physical cost. I sent her photos. He glanced at her. Photos. Stock photos. From a bridal shoot. A beat. With a Korean man of approximately your height. He absorbed this. Did you tell her my height? I may have mentioned it. What else? That you're calm. That you're not a big talker, that you show up when it matters. She said the last part with a kind of involuntary emphasis, as if the words had shaped themselves without her permission from something true rather than invented. She cleared her throat. That you make really good ramyeon. He looked at her again, this time for a half-second longer. You told your grandmother that the man you married is distinguished by his ramyeon. She asked me what he was good at in the kitchen, and I panicked. Something happened at the corner of his mouth again. Not a smile. Adjacent. I make adequate ramyun, he said. Good, perfect, great. The doors at the end of the corridor opened, and the first passengers from the JFK connection began to emerge, pulling rollaboards, checking phones, blinking in the particular way of people who have crossed 12 time zones and are now in daylight that their bodies do not understand. Zuri's hand found Do-hyun's arm again, not the desperate grip from the cafe, but something lower and more automatic, her fingers curling once around his forearm before she caught herself and let go. Keep it, he said. She looked at him. Your hand, he said. Leave it. We are married. She put her hand back on his arm. Her fingers were still shaking slightly. He did not acknowledge this. Grandma Rose Bennett came through the doors pushing a small carry-on and wearing a yellow cardigan that was the precise yellow of daffodils in the kind of spring that doesn't apologize for itself. She was 74, and she moved carefully, the way a person moves when they have learned that the body has opinions it will enforce whether you consult them or not. But her eyes were the eyes of someone much younger, dark and quick, and full of the particular alertness of a woman who had been paying attention her entire life and had no intention of stopping. She scanned the crowd the way families scan crowds, not systematically but instinctively, triangulating toward the known face. And then she found Zuri, and her face did the thing that faces do in those moments, the sudden softening that has nothing to do with muscles or anatomy and everything to do with something that precedes language. Zoo. She said it the way you say a name when you've been saying it for 30 years, and it still means everything it meant the first time. And then her eyes moved to the left, to the tall Korean man standing next to her granddaughter, with one hand slightly turned outward in a posture that might have meant nothing to most people and meant to Zuri, watching him, exactly what he intended it to mean. That he was here, that he was accounted for, and that Rose Bennett's granddaughter was standing next to someone who was not going anywhere. Oh, Rose said, and then softer. Oh, my. She moved toward them, and Do-hyun moved toward her, which Zuri had not expected, had not briefed, had not accounted for in any of the catastrophizing she had been doing for the past 20 minutes. He simply closed the distance with 3 even steps and held out his hand. And when Rose looked at his hand and then at his face, Do-hyun said, in English that was careful and slightly formal in a way that, impossibly, managed to sound like a man who took things seriously rather than a man who was uncertain. Mrs. Bennett, I have heard a great deal about you. I am glad you arrived safely. Rose looked at him for a long, considering moment. Then she took his hand in both of hers, the way elderly women sometimes do, and the grip was surprisingly firm. Do-hyun, she said, I've been waiting 3 years to say that name to your face. Something shifted in his jaw, a tightening that came and went in less than a second. Zuri saw it, because she was watching for it, watching him the way you watch someone you have thrown into a situation they did not design and are wondering what it costs them. I know, he said. I'm sorry for the wait. Well? Rose released his hand and turned to her granddaughter, and the look on her face was the look of a woman who has been hoping for something specific and is trying to decide if what she is seeing is the thing she hoped for. You didn't do him justice, Zoo. You said he was tall. This is tall. This is tall, tall. Zuri laughed, and the laugh came out wrong. Too bright, too sharp. But Rose was already looking back at Do-hyun and didn't catch it. Are you hungry, Mrs. Bennett? Do-hyun said. There is a restaurant near the international departures. Please call me Grandma Rose. She said it with the absolute authority of a woman who has not once in her life offered a second option. Every woman in this family has been called Grandma Rose at least once in your family now, so... Another fractional pause. Grandma Rose, he said, as if placing a stone carefully. Are you hungry? I could eat. She patted his arm. Lead the way. Pas The restaurant near the international terminal was the kind of airport restaurant that had tried to be a real restaurant and partially succeeded. Better lighting than it needed, actual table settings instead of laminated plastic, a menu that had opinions. Do-hyun chose a table in the corner with his back to the wall, and Zuri watched him do it without thinking. Watched him position the chairs so that Rose had the comfortable one with the padded back, and Zuri was next to him, and she thought, he does everything with the same level of attention. He applies the same precision to everything. It was terrifying, and it was something else she didn't have a word for yet. Rose ordered tea and something from the Korean section of the menu, switching between Korean and English with the easy fluency of someone who had been navigating both her whole life. And Do-hyun conversed with her in Korean with the respectful formal register that Zuri could follow but not quite replicate. And she watched him be something she had not anticipated, natural. Not performing naturalness, not mimicking it. Actually natural with this woman, asking her about the flight in a way that was specific enough to be genuine. Which seats had the turbulence, whether the airline had changed its meal service, what the connection delay in Tokyo had been. And Rose answered him with the particular warmth of someone who has been listened to properly, which is rarer than it should be. "So tells me you don't talk much," Rose said at some point, switching to English and wrapping both hands around her tea. "She is being diplomatic," Do-hyun said. "I talk when I have something to say." Rose considered him over the rim of the cup. Her eyes were doing the alert, calculating thing again. "And what do you have to say today?" A brief pause. Zuri held very still. "That I am glad you came," he said. "Even if the distance was difficult, Zuri has missed you more than she has let on. People who are devoted to the people they love often don't tell those people how much because they don't want the weight of that feeling to worry them." Silence. Rose set down her teacup with great care. She looked at Do-hyun for a long moment, the kind of look that goes past the surface of a face and looks for the structure underneath, the grain of the wood rather than the finish. Zuri felt the hair on the back of her neck rise. "That," Rose said, "is true." "I know," Do-hyun said. "She told me." It was technically true. She had told him, sort of, in the 30 seconds of breathless explanation next to the coffee counter. She had said she was sick and she was scared. He had taken that information and placed it somewhere accurate. Rose was still looking at him. "You didn't answer my question, though," she said, and now her voice was gentle in a way that was not soft, warm iron rather than wool. "What do you have to say today?" "To me. Not about Zuri. To me." Do-hyun met her eyes, and Zuri thought, this is where it goes wrong. This is where the thing he can't fake is the thing she's asking for. He was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to notice. Then he said, "That I know she has told you we are happy, and that the distance between telling someone you are happy and showing them is wide enough to lose a great deal in. I would like you to see, while you're here, what the difference looks like." Rose absorbed this. Something in her face went very still and then rearranged itself into something new. "Zoo," she said, not looking away from Do-hyun. "Yeah, Grandma. Where did you find this man?" Zuri's voice came out slightly wrecked. "Bookstore." Rose reached across the table and put her hand over Do-hyun's hand where it rested on the table. "You knocked over her books," she said. "Architecture books," Do-hyun said. "She has a particular attachment to her reference materials." "She's always been like that." Rose's thumb moved once across his knuckles. "Protective of things she cares about, even when she shouldn't have to be." She looked at him steadily. "You understand that?" "Yes," he said, and did not look away. They had been at the table perhaps 20 minutes when Adeyeze Bennett arrived. Zuri had forgotten, in the specific panic of the last hour, that her mother was supposed to be in transit, that the connection between Rose's New York flight and her soul-bound continuation required a stopover, and that Adeyeze, who lived in Seoul and had flown out to accompany her mother back, had landed at Incheon 30 minutes ahead and had texted Zuri 3 times asking where they were. She had not checked her phone since she grabbed a stranger's arm next to a coffee counter. Adeyeze Bennett was 52 years old, a retired litigation attorney who had transformed that particular skill set into a method of moving through the world with the efficiency and relentlessness of a closing argument. She was wearing a dark green wool coat, even though it was not cold, and she scanned the restaurant the moment she entered it with the focused attention of someone who has identified the variables she needs to assess and is now assessing them. She found the table, she found Zuri, she found Do-hyun. She crossed the room in a straight line. "Mama," she said, kissing Rose's cheek without breaking stride. And then she was standing across the table from Do-hyun with her hands clasped in front of her and her eyes doing the thing that Zuri recognized from every significant moment of her childhood as, "I have questions, and I intend to ask them." "So," Adeze said. Mom, Zuri said, I'm not talking to you right now. Adeze sat down across from Do-hyun, extended her hand. Adeze Bennett, Zuri's mother, you must be the husband. Do-hyun shook her hand. His grip was brief and calibrated. Kang Do-hyun, it's a pleasure. Is it? She said it like a statement rather than a question, studying his face with the professional patience of a woman who had spent 20 years watching people lie under oath. Zuri said you work in private equity. Specifically, cross-border acquisition, primarily within the Asia-Pacific corridor. Secondary market or direct? Both, depending on the asset class. Adeze's eyes narrowed by perhaps a millimeter. What was your most recent transaction? Zuri's pulse spiked. Do-hyun did not blink. I'm not in a position to discuss that outside of an NDA. You'll understand, the nature of the work requires discretion. It was, Zuri recognized, not only plausible, but genuinely how someone in that industry would answer. She watched her mother's face run the calculation. Could be evasion, could be standard practice. The uncertainty landed in the correct zone. Fair, Adeze said, in a tone that meant, I'm noting that answer, but filing it rather than closing it. How long have you been doing this? The private equity work? About 9 years. I came up through corporate restructuring. Seoul-based throughout? Primarily, sometime in Hong Kong and Singapore. And your family is Seoul? A beat. Barely perceptible. I don't have much family remaining. My focus has been professional rather than personal for most of my adult life. Zuri changed that. The last sentence was delivered with the flat matter-of-factness of someone stating a logistical fact, not performing sentiment, and Zuri thought, he is terrifyingly good at this, but she also thought, with less comfort, that there was something in the way he said it that was not entirely a calculation. Adeze was watching him with the look of someone who has decided not to decide yet. You're older than I expected. Mom. I'm making an observation, Zu. I'm not insulting him. She looked back at Do-hyun. 35? Older? 35. You've never been married before? No? Why not? The pause this time was genuine, but so brief that only Zuri caught it, and only because she was watching for every micro-expression on his face the way you watch a tightrope walk. He said, I was with someone for several years. She decided I was not what she needed. It took me longer than it should have to agree with her. Something in the table shifted. Rose made a small sound that was not quite a word. Adeze's expression moved just slightly from interrogation toward something more human. And then? Adeze said. And then, he said, I was in a bookstore. Zuri exhaled so carefully it barely qualified as exhaling. Rose reached across the table again. Not to Do-hyun this time, but to Zuri, her hand landing on top of Zuri's with the weight and warmth of someone who has been paying attention the whole time and has decided to say so in the language of touch rather than words. Zuri looked at her grandmother and found, to her private horror, that her eyes were getting hot. Don't you dare, she said quietly, to herself, to her tear ducts, to the entire situation. Too late, Rose said softly, and she was smiling. You know you can't hide from me. Adeze ordered food and they sat for another 15 minutes. She asked Do-hyun 3 more questions, each one slightly more precise than the last. About where they lived, about whether they had discussed children, about what his relationship was like with his own mother before she passed. Do-hyun answered each one in the same register, direct, unornamental, specific enough to be believable without being so detailed as to invite follow-up. Zuri answered the questions directed at her in what she hoped was natural alignment with whatever he had already established. And mostly it worked. Except for one moment when Adeze asked about the apartment they lived in, and Zuri said 4 bedrooms and Do-hyun said the same number at a half-second delay that was too short for anyone else to clock, but not for Adeze, who looked at her daughter very carefully for 2 full seconds before moving on. They were dangerous seconds. They passed. Rose, Zuri noticed, did not ask many questions at all. She sat between her daughter and her granddaughter, and she ate her food, and she looked at Do-hyun in the measured, unhurried way of someone who is not looking for specific information, but is simply paying attention to something and seeing what it yields. Once, when Do-hyun reached past Zuri to redirect the sugar dispenser she'd knocked over before it rolled off the table, Rose watched his hand and then watched his face, and something in her expression became very quiet. They were 15 minutes from the departure time for Rose's connecting flight when it happened. Rose set down her chopsticks with the careful deliberateness of an intention rather than a pause. She reached into the pocket of her yellow cardigan, the pocket Zuri had seen her reach into 10,000 times, for tissues and hard candies and the reading glasses she was always misplacing, and brought out a small cloth pouch, the kind with a drawstring that had been washed so many times the color had gone from something to something else. She set it on the table in front of Zuri. "Grandma," Zuri said, "what is—" "Open it." Zuri opened it. Inside was a bracelet. Gold, the deep warm gold that comes from age rather than from carrot advertising, with a texture that was not quite a pattern and not quite smooth, but something between the two that suggested decades of wear. It lay in her palm like a weight that was more than its own weight. She knew it. She had seen it on Rose's wrist her entire life. She had traced the pattern of it with her childhood fingers and been told, "Your great-grandmother wore this on the day she left Lagos. She wore it on the day she arrived. I wore it on the day I married your grandfather. I wore it on the day your mother was born." "Grandma." "No." "Yes." "This is... No, this is yours. This is not..." "It's a traveling thing," Rose said, and her voice was not sentimental, which was somehow worse. It was matter-of-fact the way she talked about serious things. "It goes where it's supposed to go. It's supposed to go here now." She looked at Do-hyun. Not a question, not a test, but a statement directed at him through Zuri's face. "There's a woman in your family, and she needs to know she's held. This is how we hold people in mind." Do-hyun said nothing. He watched Rose with the full attention that he usually reserved for situations of professional consequence. Rose took Zuri's wrist and clasped the bracelet on it with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times, because she had. She held Zuri's wrist for a moment. Then she let go. "It suits you," she said. "It always suited you. I was just keeping it warm." The departure announcement for Rose's connecting flight came over the speakers in Korean and then English. Gate C12. Final boarding in 20 minutes. Zuri sat looking at the bracelet on her wrist and feeling, with specific and awful clarity, that she had just accepted something sacred on the basis of a lie. The gold was warm. That was the worst part. It was already warm because Rose's hand had been warm and it transferred. She looked up and found Do-hyun looking at her with an expression that was unreadable in the specific way that his expressions were sometimes unreadable. Not because nothing was happening behind them, but because what was happening was not yet ready to be named. The moment lasted 3 seconds. Then Rose was standing, and Adeyeze was standing, and there was the particular productive chaos of an airport goodbye. Coats and carry-ons, and the check and recheck of boarding passes. And Do-hyun stood without being asked and helped Rose with her bag's shoulder strap and accepted her second hand clasp of the day without stiffening. And Adeyeze lingered a moment at Do-hyun's side with an expression that was no longer quite interrogation. "She talks about you," Adeyeze said, quietly enough that Rose couldn't hear. "Even before today. She's been talking about you for 2 years." A pause. "You're different than I pictured." "Is that good or bad?" Do-hyun said. Adeyeze considered this with the care of a lawyer choosing words. "It's neither," she said. "It just means I'll be paying attention." Then she took her mother's arm, and Rose turned at the corridor entrance and looked back at Zuri with a look that was the full weight of a grandmother's love and all the years of it, and she pressed 2 fingers to her lips and extended them, and Zuri did the same, and then they were gone. The terminal returns to being just an airport. Zuri stood next to Do-hyun, and they did not speak for a long moment. Park had appeared from somewhere nearby with the silent materialization of a man who had learned to be invisible in proximity to a person who didn't want to be watched. He stood at a respectful remove, expressionless. Zuri was looking at the bracelet. She turned her wrist once, slowly, watching the light move over the old gold. Her jaw was tight in a way that was about more than composure. "She gave me a family heirloom," she said. Not to him exactly, just into the air between them. "She gave me a family heirloom because she thinks..." She stopped. "Because I lied to her. For 2 years I lied to her, and she rewarded me for it, and I..." "You gave her something too," Do-hyun said. She looked at him. 40 minutes, he said. She boarded that plane believing that her granddaughter is loved and held and standing next to someone who will not leave when things become difficult. That is not nothing. In my experience, that is not nothing at all. Zuri studied his face, and the thing she was looking for was whether he believed it. Whether this was a performance crafted from the same professional precision that had just successfully convinced a retired litigation attorney that he was a private equity executive. She watched his face for 30 seconds, and she didn't find a performance. She found something else, something that looked, in its plainest form, like a man who understood what it meant to give someone 40 minutes of believing they were safe, because he was a man for whom such minutes had been scarce. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her with the slight flatness that crossed his face when he was correcting someone. "I told you, no thanking." "You said no thanking in front of her." He paused. Something happened in his eyes. "I may have been imprecise." She pulled out her phone. "I need to give you my number in case she—" She stopped, rethought the sentence. "For the bracelet. When she comes back to Seoul, I'll need to—" She stopped again. There was no clean way to end that sentence that was not a lie or a reckoning, and she was not ready for either. "I should have a way to reach you." He took the phone from her hand with the same easy precision he'd used on everything else this afternoon, entered a number, and handed it back. She looked at the screen. He had put his name in as simply Do Hyun, not a title, not an initial, not the surname that preceded it in every dossier and every law enforcement database in 3 countries. Just the name she had invented into a husband 2 years ago. She looked up from the screen and he was already signaling to park with the 2-finger gesture, and the space around him was already adjusting itself back to what it had been before. The distance, and the deference, and the particular silence of men who understood what it meant to stand near someone dangerous. He walked 2 steps toward the exit and then stopped, turned back. "Zuri," he said. She looked at him. "The bookstore," he said. "In Hongdae, where you told her we met. What about it?" "I know it." A beat of silence. "It's real," he said. "I was there 6 months ago. The architecture section is in the back, left corner. Bad lighting. The books fall if the shelf gets too full." He held her gaze for 1 more second. "I thought you should know, in case she asks." Then he turned and walked away, and his bodyguards folded around him like water closing over a stone, and in 40 seconds he was gone. Zuri stood in the middle of Incheon International Airport with a dead woman's bracelet warm on her wrist and a real man's number saved in her phone under a name she had invented. And she understood, with the particular clarity of someone standing at the edge of something they did not plan and cannot unenter, that the lie she had told for 2 years had just become something far more complicated than a lie. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. No, wait. A new contact. The message was 3 words. "The ramyeon is adequate." She stared at it. Then, against every reasonable instruction she could have given herself, she laughed. A real one, short and startled and gone almost before it arrived. And she looked down at the bracelet, and the laugh faded into something quieter and more complicated, and she thought about what it means to receive a sacred thing on the basis of a fiction, and whether the sacred thing knows the difference. Her phone buzzed again. "Your grandmother knew." She went still. "She knew from the first minute. She told me while you were in the restroom. She said, 'That man doesn't know your middle name.' She said she gave you the bracelet anyway because she said she recognized something in the way I stood next to you." A long pause. Then 1 more message. "She said she'll ask about the middle name when she visits Seoul. You should tell me." Zuri looked at the message for a long time. Around her, the terminal pulsed with its indifferent noise. At gate C12, somewhere behind her, a woman in a yellow cardigan was settling into a seat with a quiet smile, and her daughter was watching her with the expression of someone who is beginning to suspect that the person they're looking after has been several steps ahead of them the entire time. Zuri typed, "It's May." The response came back in less than 30 seconds. "Zuri, May Bennett, architect, Hongdae bookstore. Tuesday afternoon. I'll remember." She read it twice. Then she put her phone in her pocket, adjusted the strap of her laptop bag, and walked toward the exit. And if her step was slightly unsteady, it was not from the weight of the bracelet, though that was part of it. It was from the specific vertigo of realizing that the most dangerous man in the room had just memorized the architecture of her name, and that she had, without intending to, memorized the architecture of his stillness, and that 40 borrowed minutes had just become something neither of them had been scheduled for. She did not know yet what it would cost her. She suspected already that the price would be higher than she could currently calculate. She also suspected, in the quieter and less reasonable part of herself, that she would pay it anyway. The first call came 11 days later at 11:47 in the evening. Zuri was at her drafting table with 3 different site plans spread across it and a cold cup of tea at her elbow. And when her phone lit up with the unsaved number, she knew immediately whose it was because she had been not saving it deliberately, the way you don't save a number you are trying to convince yourself you won't need again. She looked at it for 2 full rings. Then she picked up. "She called you?" she said, instead of hello. "She called me," Do-hyun said. His voice on the phone was the same as in person, unhurried, placed precisely. "She wanted to know if we had eaten dinner." Zuri set down her pencil. "What did you tell her?" "That you had eaten, that you had worked late and eaten at your desk, which I told her was a habit I was trying to correct." Silence. On the drafting table, the site plans waited with the indifferent patience of objects that don't need anything from anyone. "How did she get your number?" Zuri said. "You gave it to her. Apparently. When she boarded the plane, you texted her my contact information in case of emergency." Zuri had done this. She remembered doing it on the train back from the airport, her thumb moving over the screen in a kind of fugue state, thinking, in case she needs him, in case she needs to reach the husband. The husband she had just watched walk away through a crowd of people who parted around him like water, and who was not, by any measure available to her, a private equity executive. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be." A pause. The kind that has texture. "She told me about your grandfather." Zuri's hand tightened on the phone. "She did. She said he died 12 years ago, and that the hardest part was not the grief. She said the hardest part was that she still talks to him, and she knows he is not there, and she does it anyway." Zuri did not say anything. The cold tea sat at her elbow. "I told her," Do-hyun said, "that I understood that, talking to something that cannot answer back. I told her I understood it very well." The quality of silence between them shifted. Zuri thought about the way he had said, in the restaurant, "I was with someone for several years." She decided I was not what she needed, the flatness of it, the way a man talks about a wound that is scarred over but still has weather in it. "She likes you," Zuri said. "She doesn't like most people quickly." "I know. She told me that also." Zuri laughed before she could stop herself, a short and helpless sound. "Of course she did. She is very direct. It's a Bennett family trait. I noticed." Another pause. "Your mother called me as well." The laughter stopped. "What?" "This afternoon. She had questions she did not finish in the airport." Zuri stood up from the drafting table. She didn't know why she stood up. There was nowhere to go. But the sitting suddenly felt wrong. "What kind of questions?" "Financial ones, primarily. She wanted to know the name of my firm." The floor was very solid under her feet. "What did you tell her?" "I told her it was a holding company, and that for compliance reasons the public-facing entity was distinct from my personal investment portfolio." She pushed. I gave her a name. A beat. "I gave her a name that will hold up to a search. It will look like a mid-size PE firm with offshore registration and a sparse web presence consistent with a company that does not want to be found easily." Zuri sat back down. "Because it is one." "Because it is one," he confirmed with the same flatness. "The answer to what I actually do and the cover story for what I told her I do have a significant amount of overlap. I did not expect that when I agreed to this, but it has turned out to be useful." She pressed her fingers to her forehead. "My mother is going to keep digging." "Yes. She was a litigation attorney for 20 years. She knows how to find things." "Yes. If she finds something, she will find the PE firm," he said. "Beyond that, what she finds will depend on how deep she goes and how much she knows to look for. Most people don't know what they're looking for until it's in front of them." "And if it gets in front of her?" The pause this time was longer. Not hesitation, calculation. She was beginning to understand the difference. "Then we will deal with it when it gets there," he said. "Not before." Zuri looked at the bracelet. She'd been wearing it every day. She had not made a decision to do this. She had simply not taken it off. The first morning, and then the second, and then it had become the shape of her wrist, and she had stopped noticing it as a choice. She noticed it now. "This is getting more complicated," she said. "Yes," Do-hyun said. "Do you want to stop?" She didn't answer immediately. The question sat in the air like something solid. "I don't know what stopping looks like," she said finally. "She already has your number. She's already called you." "Stopping looks like a story," he said. "Distance. Work. Eventually a separation that is kind and that she is sad about, but that she accepts because she loves you and she does not want your unhappiness. It is a story I can help you tell." Zuri heard the offer for what it was. Genuinely neutral, genuinely available, no agenda in either direction. He would help her end it the same way he had helped her start it, with the same precision and the same controlled absence of personal investment. "Is that what you want?" she said, before she could decide not to. A silence. Longer than any of the ones before it. "I want my ramyun recipe back," he said. "Your grandmother asked me for it, and I told her I would send it. I have not sent it." Zuri blinked. "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It isn't." He hung up. She sat with the dead call in her hand for a moment, and then she put her phone face down on the drafting table and looked at the site plans and thought about the specific texture of a silence that is chosen rather than empty. She did not call back, but she also did not save his number under anything that wasn't his name. They had coffee 2 weeks later. His suggestion, her counter-proposal on location, a place in Mapo she knew from work, not a place he would have chosen, unfamiliar ground, which she understood later was the point she was making, and only understood she was making it after she'd already made it. He arrived exactly on time, wearing the same kind of suit in a slightly different shade, collar buttoned this time. And he looked at the coffee shop with the expression of a man assessing a room's exits and then sat down without commenting on any of it. "Your mother emailed the firm," he said. Zuri set down her cup. "When?" 3 days ago. The account is monitored. She asked for a confirmation of employment. He reached into his jacket and set a printed page on the table, a letter on the firm's letterhead, signed, confirming that Kang Do-hyun served as a senior partner, his name on formal stationery, stamped. "She will receive this by post within the week." She looked at the letter. "You prepared this. My office prepared it." A pause. "It is not fraudulent. The firm exists. I am a silent partner. The letter is technically accurate." "Do-hyun," she said his name with a particular weight. "You are covering a lie with infrastructure. I am covering a situation with the minimum necessary structure to prevent a 74-year-old woman with a heart condition from discovering that her granddaughter spent 2 years." He stopped. Something moved across his face and passed. "I am being practical." "You're being practical," she repeated. "Is that a problem?" She looked at him for a long moment. Across the small table with the mismatched chairs and the coffee in thick ceramic mugs that were the kind of mugs that meant a place was confident enough in its coffee not to dress it up. She looked at the letter on the table between them. "Why are you still doing this?" she said. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. He was quiet for a moment. The coffee shop noise moved around them. 2 students near the window, a barista with headphones, the low ambient sound of music chosen to be unobtrusive. "She called me again," he said. "Thursday. She was having a bad day. She said her knee was bad and the building she lives in has stairs, and she was sitting at the bottom and didn't want to call your mother because your mother would worry." He paused. "She called me because I was the name in her phone that was not going to worry at her." Zuri's chest did something complicated. "What did you do?" "I talked to her," he said, "for 40 minutes, about the stairs and the knee, and about a restaurant she went to in the 1980s in New York that she cannot remember the name of, but that had a specific soup. We tried to identify it." A pause. "We did not identify it, but she got up the stairs." Zuri looked at him and thought, this man runs a criminal organization across 3 countries. His name is in law enforcement databases. His business is conducted in rooms most people don't know exist. He has, by any measure she is aware of, the infrastructure of a person who does not stop to help people upstairs. She did not say any of this. "Thank you," she said. "I know you said not to." "I said not to in front of her." He picked up his coffee. "This is different." It was different. She could feel that it was different. And she couldn't have said in what specific way without sounding like someone narrating their own mistake, which she was not yet ready to do. The first time they met without a reason was a Saturday in late November. Not a reason, meaning Zuri's grandmother had not called. Do-hyun had not produced new documentation. There was no maintenance required on the fiction they had built together and were apparently still building. There was simply a text that said, "The bookstore in Hongdae. I am going on Saturday. You said you had not been." She had said that. In the airport, in the rush of details, left corner, bad lighting, architecture books in the back, she had said, "I've never actually been there. I chose it because it sounded like the right kind of place." She went on Saturday. He was in the architecture section when she arrived, which was exactly where she would have expected him to be, and somehow still surprising. He was standing with a book open in his hands, reading with the focused inattention of someone who reads the way they do everything else. Completely. He did not look up when she approached because he already knew she was there. She understood, the same way he always knew the position of every person in every room he occupied. And she was not yet sure if that was reassuring or something she needed to think about more carefully. "The lighting is bad," she said. "I told you," he said, without looking up. She looked at the shelves. They were overfull in the specific way of a bookstore that has more opinions than space, which she respected. She pulled out a book at random, a monograph on brutalist architecture in Eastern Europe, and opened it, and stood next to him in the bad lighting with their shoulders not quite touching and the ambient smell of old paper and cold air coming under the door, and did not say anything else for several minutes. "The woman I was with before," he said, into the book he was reading. "She left because she said I was not present. She meant it literally, that I was in the room but not in it, that she could never find the full weight of my attention on anything we built together because I was always partially somewhere else. Threat assessment, she called it. She said she felt like a variable in a risk model instead of a person." Zuri held the brutalist architecture book and did not move. "She wasn't wrong," he said. "She was describing something accurate. I didn't know how to dispute it then, and I don't now." He turned a page. "I tell you this because you have your mother's instinct for investigation, and I would rather give you the information than have you arrive at it through other means and wonder what else I haven't said." Zuri processed this. "That's a very particular kind of honesty. It's the only kind I have. I don't do ornamental honesty. It's a waste of energy." She looked at the side of his face. He was still reading, or holding the appearance of reading. She was no longer sure they were the same thing with him. "She wasn't wrong," Zuri said carefully, "but she also wasn't entirely right. Being partly somewhere else isn't the same as being absent. Some people are partly somewhere else because the world they're managing requires it." He looked at her then, fully. The way he had looked at her grandmother in the restaurant, the full weight of it with nothing held back for perimeter assessment. It lasted only a moment, but it had the quality of something significant the way small things sometimes do, a key turning rather than a door opening. "You build things," he said. "Architect. That's the job." "What do you build?" "Right now? Mixed-use residential in Mapo, community center in Yongsan. I have a proposal out for a library." She paused. "Small things. Things that need to exist in neighborhoods. I'm not interested in towers." "Why not?" "Because towers are about the person who builds them," she said. "Neighborhood buildings are about the people who live in them. I'd rather be useful than impressive." Something in his face shifted very slightly in the direction of something she could not name but that felt like recognition. They stayed in the bookstore for 2 hours. They bought things. She bought the brutalist monograph she'd been holding. He bought 3 books she would not have predicted and 1 she would have. And they walked to a noodle place down the street and sat across from each other in a booth with plastic menus and ate without discussing anything that mattered and discussed everything that mattered. Which is a thing that happens sometimes when 2 people have already been through something unusual together and the pretense of starting from the beginning is no longer available to them. He walked her to the subway. She went down the first step and turned back. "The bookstore," she said. "You were here 6 months ago, before the airport." "Yes." "Why were you here? You don't seem like—" She stopped, tried again. "What were you looking for?" He was quiet for a moment. "I wasn't looking for anything," he said. "I was walking. I hadn't walked somewhere without a destination in a long time. I ended up here." A pause. The architecture section was badly organized. It bothered me. I reorganized part of it. She... This response didn't load. She stared at him. You reorganized a stranger's bookstore. The system they were using was arbitrary. It bothered me. That's... She stopped, tried to find the word. That's very you. He looked at her without expression, which by now she understood was not the same as looking at her with nothing. You've known me 6 weeks. I know, she said. It's still very you. She went down the steps. At the bottom, she did not look back, because she had learned enough about herself in the last 6 weeks to know that looking back was how she made decisions she hadn't finished making yet. Her mother called on a Wednesday in December at 7 in the morning, which was Adayez Bennett's preferred hour for conversations she intended to control. I got his letter, Adayezi said. Zuri was making coffee. She set the cup down on the counter with more care than was technically required. Okay, the firm checks out. Offshore registration, thin public presence, exactly what you'd expect from a firm that works with high net worth clients who don't want to be found. A pause. It checks out almost too well. Mom? I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm observing. What you're observing, Zuri said, is a man whose professional life requires discretion. You said yourself, the firm checks out. The firm checks out, Adayeze repeated. Do-hyun himself is harder to find. There's almost nothing on him pre-2018. No university records I can access, no professional history prior to the firm's founding date, no social media presence of any kind. For a man his age and his industry, that's unusual. Zuri's coffee was getting cold. She did not pick it up. Some people are private. Private and invisible are different things, Zu. Mom. She kept her voice level. This required effort. You ran a background search on my husband. The pause on the other end of the line had a specific texture, Shan. Not guilty, because Adayeze did not do guilty, but something adjacent to aware. I did due diligence. It's what I do. It's what you did for 20 years in a law firm. This is my marriage. And you are my daughter. The warmth in Adea's voice did not soften the iron underneath it, which was the most characteristic thing about her. I have been on board. I have been supportive. I showed up to that airport and I sat across from that man, and I gave him the benefit of every doubt I had available. I am still giving it, but I have questions, Zu, and I need you to tell me they are questions worth having. Zuri picked up the cold coffee and drank it cold because the alternative was throwing it, which would have been satisfying and also a waste. What questions? Where does he actually come from? What happened to his family? Why does a 35-year-old Korean man with significant financial resources have no digital footprint before 2018 and no family connections I can identify anywhere? People lose families, Zuri said. People rebuild. People rebuild and leave traces. He has no traces. That means either he's extraordinarily careful or someone was careful on his behalf. Another pause. Zu, if there is something about his background that is complicated, I need to know that you know. Not the details, just that you know. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the window, the Seoul morning was doing what December mornings in Seoul do. Gray and cold and businesslike, the kind of day that does not apologize for its weather. I know who he is, Zuri said. I know what he is. He has never once been dishonest with me about it. This was true. Every word of it was true. It was also doing significant structural work that she did not examine too closely. Adeze was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Okay. I won't push further on that. Thank you. I'm not dropping it, Adeze said. I'm just not pushing right now. There is a difference. I know, Zuri said. I know, Mom. After she hung up, she stood in the kitchen for a long time. And then she texted Do-hyun. My mother ran a background check. She can't find anything pre-2018. She's not dropping it. His response came back in 2 minutes. I know. My office flagged the inquiry on Tuesday. I've been waiting to see if you'd tell me. She stared at the screen, typed, You were testing me. His reply, I was seeing what you'd do with information that concerned both of us. That's not a test. That's how I assess people. She put the phone face down on the counter. Then she picked it back up. Typed, Don't assess me. The response took longer this time. When it came, it said, "I stopped assessing you sometime in November. I'm not sure exactly when." She held the phone and did not respond to that, because there was no response she could give that didn't open a door she had not yet decided to open. And she was still, despite everything, an architect. A person who understood that you do not begin construction on a foundation you haven't fully surveyed. Park found Do Hyun at 10 o'clock that same Wednesday in the main office on the 14th floor of a building in Gangnam that was registered to a logistics consulting firm and contained behind a set of unremarkable doors the operational nerve center of an organization that moved significant money and significant risk through 4 countries simultaneously. Park set a folder on the desk without being asked. Do Hyun looked at the folder. He did not open it immediately. Choi, Park confirmed. He sat down across the desk with the ease of someone who had earned his chair in this room through a decade of being the last person standing in every difficult situation. His people have been asking about the airport. The day we came back from Busan, someone saw the convoy stop in the main terminal, and they're asking why. What are they asking? Whether you made contact with someone, whether the stop was operational. Do Hyun was quiet. His hands were flat on the desk, which was the posture Park associated with him thinking rather than deciding. The decision would come later and would look different. Who's asking, Choi himself or his lieutenant? The lieutenant, Min-jun. He's been aggressive since Choi's health started going. He's trying to demonstrate value. By running surveillance on my airport arrivals, by tracking anything that looks irregular. Park paused. The stop was 43 minutes. That's, for our convoy, that's long enough to notice. What did they see? You walking in, a woman grabbing your arm near a coffee counter, 40 minutes inside the terminal. You walking out. Park's voice stayed neutral in the professional way, but his eyes were doing something more complex. They don't know who she is, yet. Do Hyun opened the folder. Inside were 3 photographs. Security camera stills, grainy but legible. Zuri in the coral blazer, both hands on his forearm, her face turned up toward his. Him, not pulling away. A third image from further back, the 2 of them walking toward the arrivals hall together, her hand on his arm, his head angled slightly toward her in the posture of someone listening. He looked at the photographs for a long moment. They will find her, Park said. If they're looking, they'll find her. It won't take long, she's not hidden. Her firm is public, she has a professional profile. Her projects are documented. He paused. Do Hyun, whatever this is, you need to decide what it is before Choi's people decide it for you. Do Hyun closed the folder. How much time? A week, maybe 2 before Min-jun escalates to Choi directly. Park leaned forward slightly. I need to understand something. The woman, is she? No, Do Hyun said. She has no involvement in anything operational. She doesn't know the scope. She knows what I am in the broadest sense. She doesn't know the details. Which means she's exposed without knowing she's exposed. Yes. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Park looked at him with the expression of a man who has learned over 11 years exactly how much he is and is not allowed to say. You could walk away, he said very carefully, from this specific situation before it becomes a complication of a kind that can't be managed cleanly. I know, but you're not going to. Do Hyun stood up. He walked to the window. 14 floors below, the Gangnam Street was moving through its own Wednesday morning with complete indifference to the room above it. Pull Min-jun's financial records. I want to know who he owes and what he's been promising. Choi thinks his lieutenant is loyal. I want to know what that loyalty is actually built on. Park made a note. And the woman. I will handle the woman. That's not an answer to what I asked. I know, Do Hyun said, still looking out the window. Get me Min-jun's records by Friday. Park stood. He picked up the folder. At the door, he stopped. She called the office, he said, yesterday. She asked to speak with you, but said not to interrupt if you were in a meeting. She left her number. The receptionist passed it to me because the name wasn't in our system. He set a small note on the desk near the door, not on Do Hyun's desk, where it would be acknowledged, but near the exit, where it was simply information being placed in a room. I thought you should know. He left. Do Hyun picked up the note. Zuri's number. Her name, written in the receptionist's careful script. Below it, A message transcribed from whatever she had said. Tell him. The soup. Grandma Rose identified it. Galbatang. She says she's been making it wrong for 40 years and she needs a recipe. He held the note and looked at it until the words stopped being words and started being the shape of something he was not going to look at directly yet. Then he folded it and put it in his jacket pocket and picked up the phone on his desk and called the number. She picked up on the second ring. Galbatang, she said, instead of hello. I heard. She's extremely excited. She cried a little. The crying was about the soup, but also not about the soup. It's never about the soup, he said. No, Zuri said. It never is. A pause. Not the kind that needed filling, the kind that has already decided what it is. She wants to come to Seoul in March. She wants to see the apartment. The apartment. The fictional apartment with the 4 bedrooms they had almost slipped on in the restaurant when Adayeze asked. I know, he said. I need to... She stopped. Started again. We need to talk about what happens in March. What it looks like, whether we... Another stop. He could hear her making herself say the next part. Could hear the breath before it. Whether we are still doing this in March, or whether it's time to build the exit. Silence. The Gangnam Street was still moving below. Minjun's people were somewhere in the city right now, running his name through their own networks, looking at security footage, building a picture of something they didn't understand and would not be careful with when they found it. There is something you should know, he said, before you decide anything about March. What? There are people who have noticed you. There are people adjacent to my work who saw the airport footage. They are looking at who you are. The silence on her end changed quality entirely. Do-hyun. They don't have your name yet. They will have it within 2 weeks if they continue looking. When they have it, they will try to understand what you are to me, and they will try to use that understanding as leverage. Leverage. Her voice had gone flat in the way voices go flat when a person is processing something their body understood before their mind did. You're telling me that whoever you work against, they're going to come after me. Not violently, he said, immediately and with certainty. That would break protocols that even Choi's people observe. But they will approach you. They will ask questions. They will offer things. They will try to find the shape of the connection between us, and then they will push on it. Because of 40 minutes in an airport. Because of 40 minutes in an airport and everything that came after. Another silence. Longer. He waited in it without trying to fill it because she needed the room to do what she was doing, which was, he understood, calculating. She thought the way he thought, not emotionally first, but structurally, looking for load-bearing elements, looking for what would hold and what would fail. If I walk away now, she said slowly, if we build the exit story, end the marriage, be kind about it, give Grandma Rose something she can accept. If we do that, do they stop looking? Yes, he said. If there is no connection to trace, they lose interest. And if I don't walk away, he was quiet for exactly the right length of time, not hesitating, thinking. Then I put measures in place. Your building gets additional security that you won't notice. Your commute routes get monitored. Anyone who approaches you with questions that feel strange, you take their photo and send it to me and I deal with it. You deal with it, she said. Yes. I don't want to know what that means. No, he agreed. You don't. She breathed. He could hear it. One controlled breath in, held, released. The breath of someone who is making a structural decision and is being honest with themselves about its weight. The bookstore, she said. In November. You went there 6 months ago, before any of this, and you reorganized the architecture section because it bothered you. He said nothing. He knew she was getting somewhere. And you remember which books fell, she said. You remember which shelf was overfull. You went back and you knew where they were. You bought 3 books I wouldn't have predicted and 1 I would have, which means you've been paying enough attention to know what I'd predict. Her voice was very even. You told me you stopped assessing me in November. I don't think that's true. I think you never stopped, but I think what changed in November is what you were assessing for. He did not answer immediately because the answer was true, and because true answers to certain questions have a specific gravity. Zuri, he said. Don't, she said. Don't manage this. Don't give me the version that's been considered for risk. Just a pause. Just tell me what you actually want. The window? The street below? Minjun's people somewhere in this city running his name. Rose Bennett in New York with a galbatang recipe and a March flight she was already planning. Arez with her litigation attorney's eyes and her folder of unanswered questions. The fold of paper in his jacket pocket with Zuri's name in someone else's handwriting. I want, he said, to not build the exit. 3 seconds of silence. Okay, she said. Okay. You should know, she said, that my mother is going to find something eventually. She's not going to stop looking. I know. And when she does, he said, I will tell her the truth, all of it, on my own terms and at the right time, but not because she found it, because I choose to. Another pause, shorter. Okay, she said again, different weight this time, something that was not agreement, but alignment. March, he said. We'll figure out the apartment. You have 5 months. I'm aware. Do-hyun. She said his name in the particular way she'd been saying it recently, where the weight of it sat differently than it did in the airport when it was still a name she'd invented. If something happens, if any of these people approach me, I will not fall apart. I know, he said. I'm just telling you, so you don't treat me like something that needs to be managed from a distance. He looked at the fold of paper in his hand. I know, he said again, and this time he meant the thing underneath it, which was, I know who you are. I have been learning the shape of it since a Tuesday afternoon in an airport. I know that you are not a variable in a risk model. I know this because you are the first person in 4 years who has made me aware of the difference. He did not say any of that, but she heard the silence it was in because she had gotten good at that. Good night, she said. Good night, Zurime. She hung up. He stood at the window for a long time after, holding the phone in one hand and the folded paper in the other, and in the city below him, somewhere in its 10 million moving parts, a man named Min Jun was building a picture of something that was no longer a fiction and was not yet safe. And the window between those two things was closing faster than 5 months. And Do-hyun knew it with the bone-deep certainty of a man who had survived this long by knowing things before they arrived. He called Park back. Move the timeline, he said. I want Minjun's records by Thursday morning, not Friday. And I want a full security assessment on an address in Mappo by end of week. A pause. The architect, Zuri Bennett. She stays uninvolved. No contact from our side, no alerts, nothing that tells her the level of what's moving. She said she won't fall apart, and I believe her, but I'm not going to let it get to the point where we find out. Understood, Park said. One more thing. He put the folded paper in the inside pocket of his jacket, against his chest. Galbitang, find me the best recipe, not restaurant style, home-cooked, the kind a grandmother would make. A very brief silence from Park's end. Sir? It's for her grandmother. Of course it is, Park said, in the voice of a man who has chosen, after 11 years, to simply accept the full range of what his job requires. Do-hyun hung up. He put on his jacket, picked up the folder on his desk, and opened it again to the 3 security stills. Zuri's hands on his arm, his head angled toward hers, the corridor stretching behind them toward a set of arrival doors, a yellow cardigan, a woman who saw through a lie inside the first minute and chose to give her bracelet anyway. He looked at the photographs for a long time. Then he closed the folder and put it in the drawer and locked it, not because anyone in this office would open it without permission, but because some things you lock away not to hide them, but because they belong somewhere protected. He turned off the office light and walked out, and the door closed behind him with the particular finality of a man who has made a decision he will not re-examine. And somewhere in the city, the clock on 5 months was already running, and it was running faster than either of them knew. Thursday came in cold and without ceremony, the kind of sole winter morning that arrives already tired of itself. The sky, the flat white of old concrete, the air carrying the specific bite of wind off the Han that finds every gap in every coat and does not apologize for it. Do-hyun was at his desk at 7:15 when Park walked in and set a folder down with the particular weight of a man carrying something he would rather not be carrying. Minjun's financials, Park said. Do-hyun opened the folder. He read for 4 minutes without speaking. Park stood across the desk and watched him read with the expression of someone who has already read the same material and is now watching another person arrive at the same conclusion, which is not a comfortable thing to watch. Do-hyun closed the folder. He's not working for Choi, Do-hyun said. He hasn't been working for Choi for approximately 8 months, Park said. The money trail goes to a shell account in Macau that traces back 3 layers deep to Lee Sang-wook's operation in Busan. Lee Sang-wook. Do-hyun sat with that name for a moment. Lee Sang-wook, who had been, for 6 years, a rival and a balance point. The kind of enemy you keep alive because the alternative is a vacuum, and vacuums in their business filled with things worse than the enemy you knew. Lee Sang-wook, who had, 3 months ago, made a very reasonable public gesture toward negotiation and had sent a very polite representative to a very neutral location to discuss it, while his money was already inside Choi's organization through Choi's own lieutenant. The meeting in Busan, Do-hyun said. Yes, Park said. I think so. The meeting in Busan. The syndicate gathering that had brought Do-hyun through Incheon on a Tuesday afternoon 4 months ago, the meeting where 4 organizational heads had sat down to discuss the Eastern Corridor distribution arrangement, the meeting where certain commitments had been made, certain territories verbally confirmed, and where Do-hyun had come away believing the negotiations were stable. Min-jun was in the room, Do-hyun said. He was in the room, Park confirmed. He told Lee everything that was said, everything we said. Our positions, our concessions, our timeline on the Incheon arrangement. Lee has been negotiating with full knowledge of our hand for 4 months. Park's jaw was tight in a way it only got when he was managing something that wanted to be fury and needed to remain professional. The airport security inquiry wasn't about you stopping in the main terminal. That was already decided before the airport. Min-jun flagged you specifically because Lee wanted to know if you had any vulnerability outside the operational sphere. Someone he could use for pressure. When the footage showed a woman grabbing your arm in 40 minutes unaccounted for, he had something to work with, Do-hyun said. He had something to work with. Do-hyun stood. He walked to the window. The street below was doing its Thursday morning routine without any awareness of what was being decided above it, which was always the way. The city moved, and underneath the city's movement, other things moved. And the distance between those 2 layers was the precise width of a window in a building registered to a logistics firm. How long before Lee moves on it, Do-hyun said. If I had to estimate, days, not weeks. Park paused. He doesn't need to touch her directly. He just needs her to know that he knows who she is. That's enough leverage to work with if he thinks she's something you're protecting. She is something I'm protecting. I know that, Park said, which means Lee knowing it is the entire problem. Do-hyun turned from the window. His face had gone into the particular configuration that the men who worked for him had learned to read as the last moment of stillness before something changed completely. Not anger, not panic, something colder and more precise. The expression of a man who has just had his calculations overturned and is already building new ones on the rubble of the old. Where's Min-jun right now? He said. We have him. He came in this morning. He doesn't know we have his financials. He thinks this is a routine briefing. It will be a brief briefing, Do-hyun said. Get me a car and call Zuri. What do I tell her? Tell her not to go to work today. Tell her to stay in her apartment and not open the door for anyone she doesn't know, and that I will explain when I can. He was already moving toward the door. Don't tell her why. Not yet. She'll ask. Tell her I asked her to trust me for 6 hours, and that I will explain everything after. Park picked up his phone. And if she doesn't agree to stay in? Do-hyun pulled on his jacket and looked at Park over his shoulder with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite anything else. She will argue, he said. Let her argue and then she'll stay. She's an architect. She understands load-bearing structures. She'll know that if I'm asking without explanation, the explanation is the kind that requires the situation to be resolved before it can be safely delivered. He walked out. Behind him, Park was already dialing. Min-jun was 31 years old and had the compact, contained energy of a man who had spent his entire adult life trying to make himself appear larger than he was, which was a specific kind of dangerous because it was the energy of someone with something to prove rather than something to protect. He was sitting in the briefing room on the 12th floor when Do-hyun walked in, and he stood immediately with the trained deference of someone who had spent 4 years learning the gestures of loyalty well enough to make them automatic. Do-hyun sat down across from him. He set the folder on the table between them. He did not open it. Tell me about Lee Sang-wook, he said. The microsecond of reaction was everything. Not guilt exactly, but the body's ahead of the mind knowledge that the thing it has been hiding has just been named in a room where naming things has consequences. Minjun's stillness was a half-beat too deliberate. His face reassembled itself correctly, professionally, but the reassembly was visible if you knew what you were watching. And Do-hyun had been watching faces in rooms like this for 15 years. I don't have a relationship with Lee's operation, Minjun said. Do-hyun opened the folder. He turned it around and pushed it across the table with one finger. The account in Macau, he said. Third row from the bottom. That's where the deposits originate. It takes 3 corporate layers to get to Lee's holding structure, but the path is clean enough to follow if you know what you're looking for. He paused. I know what I'm looking for. Minjun looked at this folder. Something moved through his face. Not the thing that comes after you've been caught, but the thing that comes just before you decide what to do about being caught. Do-hyun watched him make the decision, watched him choose the version that was committed rather than the version that collapsed, and felt the particular cold regard of a man who respects the decision even while it changes what happens next. He approached me, Minjun said, 8 months ago, after the Busan arrangement fell through the first time. He said Choi was finished, that the organization needed new leadership, and that he was prepared to support someone positioned correctly. He met Do-hyun's eyes with the directness of someone who has decided honesty is the only remaining play. He said you were the problem, that you were too cautious, too careful, that you'd been running the same conservative model for years, and the market was moving past it. He said whoever took point on the Eastern Corridor first would own the next decade. And you believed him. I believed the analysis, Minjun said. The analysis wasn't wrong. The analysis wasn't wrong, Do-hyun agreed, with the flat absence of emotion that was more unsettling than anger. The mistake was confusing an accurate assessment with a trustworthy source. He leaned forward slightly. Lee Sang-wook doesn't want new leadership of this organization. He wants this organization destabilized long enough for him to consolidate the Incheon port access without competition. You weren't a partner in his plan. You were a tool. Something shifted in Minjun's face, the kind of shift that happens when a person realizes they have been positioned in a story they thought they were writing. The woman, Do-hyun said. The one from the airport footage. What did you tell him? Minjun's jaw tightened, that she appeared to have a personal relationship with you, that the stop was not operational, that she was a civilian with no organizational connection. A pause. He already knew more than I did by the time I reported it. He had his own people pulling records. He told me her name before I found it. When? 10 days ago. 10 days. Do-hyun did the calculation without showing it. 10 days meant Lee had Zuri's name, her professional profile, her firm's address, and 10 days to decide how to use it. 10 days in which Do-hyun had been moving at the pace of a Thursday, and Lee had been moving at a different pace entirely. He stood up. You're done here, he said to Minjun. Not a threat, a logistical statement. The door opened behind him. 2 of Do-hyun's senior men, the kind whose presence in a doorway made the geometry of a room change. Do-hyun, Minjun said, with a controlled evenness that cost him something. Whatever you're going to do. I'm going to let you leave, Do-hyun said. You have 12 hours. Take whatever you have and go somewhere that isn't Seoul, and then go somewhere that isn't wherever Lee's people would think to look for you. Because when Lee finds out that you've been identified and contained, he will not be interested in your continued ability to provide testimony. He picked up the folder. 12 hours, Minjun. I'd suggest you start counting. He walked out. Zuri was standing in the middle of her apartment when Do-hyun arrived, which told him she had been pacing, because the middle of a room is where pacers end up when they stop. She was wearing a gray sweater that was too big, and her hair was pulled back with the slightly chaotic efficiency of someone who hadn't been planning to be home and had adjusted. The bracelet was on her wrist. He noticed it the way he always noticed it now, not as an observation but as something his eyes went to as orientation, the way you find a fixed point. 6 hours, she said. You said 6 hours. It's been 4. The situation moved. What situation? Her voice was controlled in a way that meant it was working to be controlled. You had Park call me and tell me to stay inside and not answer my door and not ask why. Do you know what that does to a person's morning? I know what it does, he said. I'm sorry for it. Don't apologize, just explain. He sat down. Not at her table, on her couch, which was where he sat when he came here, which was something he noticed only now as evidence of a pattern. He had been here enough times to have a where he sat. There is a man named Lee Sang-wook, he said. He operates in Busan. He has been, for the past 8 months, running an infiltration of my organization through a man who reported to me. That man has been providing Lee with operational intelligence since before the airport. Zuri stood very still. Since before the airport. Yes, the airport footage. You grabbing my arm. The 40 minutes inside. His people flagged it and brought it to Lee. Lee spent the past 10 days building a profile on you. He watched her face as the architecture of it reassembled itself around what he was saying. He has your name, your firm's address, your professional history. He likely has the address of this apartment. The silence that followed had a specific texture. Not the silences between them that had become familiar and warm, but something with edges in it. He's going to come after me, she said. Not violently, that's not his method. He'll approach you as something else, a journalist, a building inspector, a colleague referral. He'll ask questions that seem unrelated and that build a picture of your relationship with me that he can use as leverage in a negotiation he's planning. Do-hyun kept his voice level and informational because she had asked him not to manage her, and the way he honored that was to give her facts rather than packaged conclusions. He will try to make you a variable in a calculation. I'm telling you this because you have the right to know the full shape of what you're in. What I'm in, she said. She said it without inflection, which was worse than if she'd said it with anger. Yes. Because of 40 minutes in an airport. Because of everything that came after 40 minutes in an airport, he said. The airport was visible, but what put you in this position is the 4 months after it. The calls, the coffee, the bookstore. He held her eyes. Me. She turned away from him. She walked to the window, which was what she did when she was processing. He knew this about her now. The way she needed glass between herself and the city when she was thinking through something that had weight. She stood there for long enough that the silence between them became something he was sitting inside rather than observing. You knew, she said to the window. Weeks ago you told me they were looking. You knew they'd find something. You said you'd put measures in place. I did put measures in place, and it wasn't enough. The infiltration was deeper than I assessed, he said. That is on me. I was working with incomplete information about my own organization, and that gap became an exposure that reached you. That is directly on me. She turned around. Her face had the expression of someone who has finished processing and is now in the part that comes after. What happens now? Now I move faster than Lee does. I have his financial trail and his operational structure inside my organization, and I have, as of this morning, enough documented evidence of his infiltration to present to the relevant authorities at a time of my choosing. He paused. This ends with Lee, not with you. How long? Weeks, maybe less. He'll move when he thinks he has leverage, which means when he tries to use you. When he tries, I'll know, and that's when it ends. So I'm bait, she said. Not accusatory, analytical. No, he said, with a certainty that was immediate and flat. You are not bait. You are a person I am protecting, and protection and exposure are not the same thing. You will not be put in a position where he gets close enough to speak to you, but I needed you to know why today changed. She looked at him. The gray sweater, the bracelet, the morning light through the apartment window laying itself across the drafting table where her site plans were still spread from the night before. The pencil still where she'd left it when Park called. I have a meeting, she said. This afternoon, a client presentation for the Yongsan Community Center. It's been scheduled for 3 weeks. I know, he said. Park will have 2 people in the building. You won't see them. Your client won't see them. The meeting happens normally. Something moved through her face. You already planned for the meeting. I planned for the meeting before I left the office, he said. Before I came here. She looked at him for a long moment, and in the look was a kind of reckoning. Not with him, but with something broader, something that had been building since an airport corridor and was now standing in her apartment in the full light of a December Thursday, demanding to be seen for exactly what it was. My mother is going to find out, she said. Not just the PE firm, all of it. If Lee's people are building a profile on me, and if this ends in... She stopped. However it ends. There will be a record somewhere. There will be something she can find. Yes, he said. There will be. You said you'd tell her yourself. On your terms, at the right time. I meant that. Do-hyun. She said his name in the particular way she had now, where it meant, stop being precise and be real with me. Is the right time before or after Lee moves? He was quiet. After, he said. When it's over and there's nothing active that can reach her. When I can sit across from her with something resolved rather than something in motion. And if something goes wrong before it's over, he met her eyes. Nothing will go wrong. That's not an answer. No, he said. It isn't. She walked away from the window. She sat down on the other end of the couch, not next to him, but in the same furniture, which was its own statement. She pulled her knee up and wrapped her arms around it and looked at her drafting table and her site plans, and the cold cup of tea from that morning that she still hadn't thrown out. Call my grandmother, she said. Tonight. She calls you on Thursdays. Don't skip it. He looked at her. Why? Because if you skip it, she'll know something is wrong. She knows your patterns already. Zuri looked at him sideways with the expression that was tired and something else underneath the tired. She's been calling you every Thursday for 2 months. You think I don't know that? You never said anything. I was waiting to see if you'd tell me. She almost smiled, except that the circumstances had taken the humor out of it. Call her. Tell her you're sending the galbatang recipe. Tell her March is still happening. Tell her whatever you need to tell her that is true enough to hold. He nodded. Okay. And Do-hyun. She reached across the distance between them on the couch and touched the back of his hand once, briefly, with 2 fingers. Not a grip, not the desperate hold from the airport, something that had learned itself over 4 months into something quieter and more certain. When this is over, when you sit down with my mother, I'll be there. You don't have to be. I know I don't have to. She took her hand back. I'll be there anyway. He looked at where her hand had been. Then he looked at her. The truth of this, all of it, what I am, the full scope, it will change how you stand in it. Maybe, she said, but I built the foundation. I don't walk away from what I build because the load is heavier than estimated. He held her gaze. You say that now. I know what I'm saying, she said, with the particular flatness of someone who has calculated the load and is giving you the number, not an approximation. I've been saying it since November. You just keep waiting for me to unsay it. He stood. I'll call tonight. Good. She uncurled from the couch. I have a meeting to prepare for. He walked to the door. He had his hand on it when his phone rang. He looked at the screen and something in his face went very still in the way that meant the shift had already happened before he answered. He answered. He said nothing for 15 seconds. Then he said, in Korean, 2 words that Zuri did not speak well enough to catch, and hung up. He did not turn around immediately. His hand was still on the door, and his back was to the room, and she watched the set of his shoulders do the thing she had learned to read as something being absorbed and contained rather than expressed. What? She said. He turned. His face was controlled in a way that cost him, visibly, more than his face usually cost him. Lee moved this morning, he said, before we contained Min-jun. He already had everything he needed. A pause. He didn't approach you. Then who did he... He approached your mother. The room went very quiet. He sent a representative to her office in Seoul at 9 o'clock this morning, Do-hyun said. Before Park called you. Before I had Min-jun's records. The representative told your mother that her son-in-law is the head of a criminal syndicate operating across Korea, Japan, and the Philippines. He gave her documentation, photographs, organizational charts with Do-hyun's name at the top. His voice stayed even. He told her that her daughter has been living for the past 4 months inside the periphery of a criminal organization. And he told her that if she wanted her daughter out safely, she needed to cut the connection before it became legally significant. Zuri's lungs stopped working for a moment in the particular way they stop when the ground has moved and the body hasn't caught up yet. Mom, she said, not to him, to the air. She has been trying to reach you for the past 4 hours, he said. Park intercepted the calls. He should not have... That was an error in my instructions. He was supposed to hold external communications that seemed operational, not personal. And I'm sorry, Zuri. I am telling you now that I am sorry for that and that you should call her. I need to... She was already moving, picking up her phone, looking at the screen. 14 missed calls. Her mother's name 14 times, laid out in the clean, awful columns of a missed call list that told the story of 4 hours of a woman trying to reach her daughter and not being able to. Her hands were shaking. She looked at the shaking and then she looked at Do-hyun. She knows, Zuri said. Yes, everything. Everything Lee chose to show her, which is accurate, but not complete. She knows the organization. She knows my position in it. She does not know how we actually met or that the marriage was invented. She thinks... He stopped. She thinks you knew from the beginning what I was and kept it from her. Zuri looked at him with an expression that had moved past what she had been feeling a moment ago into something that had no clean name. Not anger, not fear, something that was built out of both of those and also out of the specific grief of watching a thing you built get demolished from outside. She thinks I chose this, Zuri said. She thinks I knowingly married into a criminal organization and lied to her face about it. Yes, he said, that is what she believes right now. The phone was ringing in her hand, her mother's name on the screen. I have to answer this, she said. I know. You should go. He did not move immediately. He looked at her with the full weight of his attention and said nothing. And she understood this for what it was. Him giving her the room to handle this without him in it, without the complication of his presence in whatever came next. And she understood also that this was costing him something. And she did not have the room to acknowledge that right now, because the phone was still ringing and her mother had been trying to reach her for 4 hours and believed something devastating and true adjacent and false in its architecture. And all of it was coming apart at the seams in the exact way a foundation fails. Not all at once, but in the particular chain of it, load shifting to the weakest point giving, and the thing you built beginning its long, terrible lean toward the ground. She answered the phone. Mom, she said. And on the other end, Adeze Bennett's voice came through, and it was not the litigation attorney's voice. It was not the careful word-choosing voice. It was the voice underneath all of that. The raw one, the mother one. And it said, Zuri, what have you done? The call lasted 22 minutes. Zuri knew this because she was looking at the timer on her phone when she finally lowered it from her ear, and 22 minutes was the length of the longest and worst conversation she had ever had with her mother, which was a significant distinction in a relationship that had contained some difficult conversations over 30 years. Adeze had not shouted. That was almost worse. She had spoken in the voice of someone who is keeping a very precise grip on themselves because the alternative is something they cannot afford in a professional office building on a Thursday morning, and that precision had a quality to it, cold and surgical, that was more devastating than volume would have been. She had said, a criminal organization, zoo. Not a gray area, not a man with a complicated past, an active criminal syndicate. The woman who brought the documentation had photographs, financial records, testimony from 3 individuals with direct operational knowledge. She sat across from me in my own office and laid it out like a case file. A pause. It was a case file. I know what a case file looks like. Zuri had said, Mom, it's not what... Don't! Just the one word. The weight of it. Don't tell me it's not what it looks like when what it looks like is my daughter embedded in something that could put her in legal jeopardy, or worse, physical jeopardy, and has been lying to me and to your grandmother for 4 months about the nature of it. Don't. Zuri had not said anything for a moment. Did you know? Adeze had asked. From the beginning. Did you know what he was? And Zuri had said, because she was her mother's daughter, and could not do ornamental honesty either. Not from the beginning, but I knew before it became what it is. The silence after that had lasted long enough to have geography. You need to come to my office, Adeze had finally said. Today. Bring him if you're going to keep defending him, but you will come today, and you will tell me everything from the beginning. Do you understand me? Everything. Yes, Zuri had said. Okay. Yes. She lowered the phone now and stood in the apartment with the site plans on the drafting table and the cold tea and the bracelet on her wrist and the specific silence of a space that had just had something very loud happen in it. She texted Do-hyun, my mother's office, today. She wants both of us. His reply came in 40 seconds. What time? 2 o'clock. I'll be there. Then, after a pause, Zuri, I'm going to tell her the truth, all of it, starting from the airport. She stared at the message, typed back, I know. Then she sat down at her drafting table and put her hands flat on the site plans and breathed in and out, twice. Because she had a presentation for the Yongsan Community Center at 11 o'clock and she was an architect, and the building needed to exist regardless of what was happening in her personal life. And she was going to deliver that presentation, and then she was going to her mother's office, and whatever happened after that was going to happen after that. She picked up her pencil. She worked. Us. Do-hyun spent the 3 hours between Zuri's text and 2 o'clock doing the thing he did when time was structured and outcomes were not yet fixed. He worked the problem. He called 3 people. He sent 2 communications through channels that did not exist on paper. He reviewed with Park and 2 of his senior operational people the full documented record of Lee Sang-wook's infiltration, every transaction, every communication intercept, every piece of the evidence architecture that had been quietly assembled over the past 72 hours. It's enough, Park said, looking at the spread of documents across the conference table. For a referral. If this goes to the financial crimes unit with what we have, they can build the rest independently. When it goes, Do-hyun said. Not if. Park looked at him. You're going to give this to law enforcement. I'm going to make sure it gets there, Do-hyun said. There is a distinction in how it arrives. I want it to arrive through a channel that is associated with the evidence rather than with me directly. A referral from a source they have reason to trust. That kind of referral takes... I know what it takes, Do-hyun said. I've been building that relationship for 2 years. This is what it was built for. He straightened the documents. Lee made a mistake when he went to Adeze Bennett directly. He thought he was applying pressure. He created a witness with litigation experience and no organizational loyalty to anyone's interest except her daughter's safety. That is not leverage. That is a liability. For him. Park absorbed this. The timeline. 72 hours, Do-hyun said. Lee will move again when he doesn't get a response to this morning's approach. He'll escalate. When he does, I want to already be in the position I'm moving toward, not still in transit. And this afternoon, Do-hyun straightened his jacket. This afternoon, I'm going to an office in Gangnam to have a conversation with a woman who spent 20 years in litigation and who now knows, more or less, what I am. I'm going to tell her everything she doesn't know yet, and I'm going to give her the documentation on Lee, and I'm going to let her be as angry as she needs to be. He picked up his phone. Then I'm going to go back to work. Park looked at him for a moment. Do-hyun, what she does with the information is her choice, Do-hyun said. I can't control that. I'm not going to try. Park said nothing further. He had learned over 11 years to identify the moments when Do-hyun had made a decision that was not operational but personal, and to recognize that those decisions had a different architecture than the ones Park was equipped to advise on. Adeze Bennett's office was on the 11th floor of a building in Gangnam that had the clean, confident lines of a firm that had been successful long enough not to need to advertise the fact. Her assistant showed Do-hyun and Zuri in at 2 o'clock with the particular professional neutrality of someone who has been told to be neutral and is executing it precisely. Adeze was standing when they came in, not behind her desk, beside it, which Do-hyun registered as a deliberate positioning. She was not receiving them across a barrier. She was occupying the same space, which was the stance of someone who intended to conduct this as a confrontation rather than a deposition. She looked at Zuri first, and the look was complicated and maternal and furious all at the same time. Then she looked at Do-hyun, and the look was the litigation attorney's look, stripped of the careful diplomatic layering she had applied to it in the airport restaurant 4 months ago. Sit down, she said. They sat. She remained standing. The woman who came to my office this morning, Adeze said, she represented herself as a journalist, investigative. She had a press credential that I've since confirmed is legitimate. She works for an outlet I've heard of. She paused. She was also, based on the materials she presented and the way she presented them, acting on behalf of someone with a specific interest in this information, reaching me at this specific time. That's not journalism. That's a delivery mechanism. Yes, you'll just this, Do-hyun said. Adeze looked at him. You agree? The journalist is real. The motivation for the timing is not journalistic. The man who sent her is named Lee Sang-wook. He operates a competing organization in Busan, and he has been attempting to destabilize my operation for the past 8 months. Your daughter became a point of leverage when she became associated with me. This morning was Lee applying that leverage. He reached into his jacket and set a folder on Adeyeze's desk. This is the financial documentation of his infiltration of my organization, the communication records of his contact with a man who reported to me, and the evidentiary basis for a formal referral to the Financial Crimes Division of the National Police Agency. I intend to make that referral in the next 48 hours. Adeyeze looked at the folder. She did not touch it. You're going to hand evidence of a criminal operation to law enforcement. Evidence of his criminal operation, Do-hyun said. Yes. What about yours? The room was very quiet. Zuri was sitting very still next to Do-hyun, with her hands in her lap and her jaw set at the angle it went when she was holding something together through will rather than ease. That, Do-hyun said, is a longer conversation. One I am prepared to have, but not the one you asked me here for today. Adeyeze looked at him for a long moment. She pulled out the chair behind her desk and sat down, not because she was retreating behind the barrier, but because she had finished the standing portion of this and was moving into the part that required focus. She folded her hands. Tell me how you met my daughter, she said. From the beginning, the actual beginning, Do-hyun told her. All of it, the convoy, the coffee counter, the 30 seconds, the 40 minutes. Rose's arrival, the table in the airport restaurant, the bracelet. He spoke without ornamentation or apology, in the same register he used for everything, direct, placed, specific. He did not make it better than it was. He did not minimize the deception or reframe its origins. He said, your daughter invented a husband named Kang Do-hyun because she was trying to protect a woman she loves from unnecessary grief, and the universe, with whatever it uses for humor, delivered the actual man. When he finished, the office was quiet enough to hear the building's ventilation system. Adeyeze looked at Zuri. You grabbed a stranger's arm, she said. I was desperate, Zuri said. You grabbed the arm of the head of a criminal syndicate. I didn't know that yet. When did you know? Zuri met her mother's eyes. About 6 weeks in, when I asked him directly and he told me directly. A pause. He didn't hide it. When I asked, he answered. Adeyeze's jaw tightened. And you stayed? Yes. Why? Zuri was quiet for a moment. Then she said, because by then I knew who he was under it. And the two things were both real, and I had to decide which one I was going to let define the whole. She held her mother's gaze. I know that's not the answer you want. No, Adeyeze said. It isn't. She looked back at Do-hyun. The bracelet. My mother gave you a family heirloom. She gave Zuri the bracelet, Do-hyun said. I was present. She gave it because she believed you were married. She gave it, Do-hyun said, because she had already determined in the first 10 minutes that the marriage was a fabrication. She told me this when Zuri went to the restroom. She gave the bracelet anyway because she said she recognized something. I can tell you what she said, if you want the exact words. Adeyeze's expression moved. Something cracked in it, very slightly, in the way the face of a person who is holding something very tightly cracks when they are reminded of someone they love. What did she say? Adeyeze said. She said, I know a man who would leave the moment things got hard. I've known too many of them. That's not what I'm seeing. He paused. Then she said, now go back before Zhu thinks I'm interrogating you. Adeyeze looked at the surface of her desk for a moment. When she looked back up, the litigation attorney's eyes had something else in them. Not softness, but the thing that exists just before softness in a person for whom softness is hard won. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Something in her face changed. I have to take this, she said, with a suddenness that was not dismissal, but urgency. Wait here. She stepped out. The door closed. Zuri exhaled. She turned to Do-hyun. She's not going to forgive this easily. I know. She might not forgive it at all. I know that too. Zuri looked at the folder on the desk. Do-hyun, the referral to the police. If you hand them Lee's file, they're going to look at everything adjacent to it, including you. Yes, he said. That's... She stopped. That's not a small thing. No, he said. It isn't. You've been managing this for 15 years, the whole structure of it. I have, he said. She looked at him with the full weight of her attention, which he had learned was not a casual thing. Zuri Bennett's full attention was a structural assessment, the kind that looked for what was holding and what was not. Is this because of me? She said. The referral. The decision to involve law enforcement. Is this because of what happened to my mother this morning? He was quiet for long enough that the answer was apparent before he gave it. It's because of a sequence of things, he said. This morning accelerated a timeline I had already begun considering, but yes, what happened to your mother today is part of it. What could happen to you if this continues is part of it. He held her gaze. And what I want the next 10 years to look like is part of it. Those are not separate considerations. She looked at him for a moment longer, then she looked at the bracelet on her wrist. Does Park know? Park has suspected for 6 weeks that this was the direction I was moving. I confirmed it this morning. How did he take it? He said, about time. Something moved at the corner of Do-hyun's mouth. Then he asked if he should start looking for other employment. I told him that depended on his own choices, not mine. The office door opened and Adaeze came back in. Her face had changed again. Whatever the phone call had been, it had moved something because she was now in motion differently, with the contained urgency of someone who has received new information and is integrating it at speed. She sat down and looked at Do-hyun directly. That was a contact of mine at the NPA, she said. Financial Crimes Division. Someone I worked with on a joint case 4 years ago. A pause. He called me, not the other way around. He said there is currently an active inquiry into Lee Sang-wook's operation. They have been building it for 14 months. They're missing a financial layer, offshore transactions through a Macau shell that they cannot access because the account structures are registered through a jurisdiction they don't have treaty access to. She put her hands flat on the desk. You have that layer. Do-hyun looked at her. Yes. In that folder. Substantially, yes. Adaeze looked at the folder. If I were to facilitate the introduction of that documentation to my contact at the NPA through a channel that protects the source, she said slowly, choosing each word with the care of someone constructing a legal argument in real time, and if the documentation is as complete as you've represented, Lee's case closes within the month. That is my assessment as well, Do-hyun said. And in exchange, Adaeze said, in a voice that had gone very level, I would want to understand the full scope of your own legal exposure, and I would want it in writing, and I would want to have a conversation with my contact about what cooperative disclosure looks like for someone in your position. She held his eyes. I'm not offering you immunity. I'm not in a position to offer you anything except a competent assessment of your options and a channel to people who can actually deliver on those options. But I'm a litigation attorney, and I know how these things work, and I'm telling you that a man who walks in with evidence of this quality, voluntarily, has a fundamentally different conversation with law enforcement than the man they eventually come looking for. The office was very still. Do-hyun looked at Adaeze Bennett with the full weight of his attention, and something in his face did the thing it very rarely did. It opened slightly in the direction of something that was not calculation. You're offering to help me, he said. I'm offering to help my daughter, Adaeze said, with a clarity that was sharp and also underneath it something warm. The fact that helping her involves helping you is a complexity I'm managing in real time. Don't make it sentimental. I won't, he said. Good. She reached across the desk and pulled the folder toward her. I'm going to read this. Then I'm going to make 2 phone calls. Then you and I are going to have a much longer conversation, probably tomorrow, and you're going to bring everything you have. She looked at him steadily. Everything, not a curated version, not the version designed to minimize exposure. Everything. Yes, he said. She looked at Zuri. The look between them was the compressed entirety of 30 years and a very complicated morning, and Zuri held it without looking away. We will also, Adaeze said, have a separate conversation, you and me, about the airport, about the 2 years before the airport, about what you've put your grandmother through without knowing it. I know, Zuri said. She loves you enormously, Zu. Don't confuse her capacity for that with her being naive. I know. Zuri said again. She told me, in a manner of speaking. Something moved in Adayeze's face. Not forgiveness, too early for forgiveness, but the thing that precedes it in a mother who has been frightened for her child and is now slightly less frightened. Go home, she said, both of you. I'll call you tonight after I read this. They stood. Do-hyun picked up his jacket. At the door, Adeyeze said his name. He turned. She said you stood next to her, Adeyeze said. My mother. She said you stood next to Zuri the way a man stands when he's not going anywhere. She looked at him with the clear-eyed assessment that had been looking for his structure since an airport restaurant in September. I have spent 4 months deciding whether that was real or performed. He said nothing. I haven't decided yet, she said. But I'm still deciding, which is further than I expected to get. He nodded once. Then they left. The elevator down was quiet. When the doors opened to the lobby, Zuri walked out and kept walking until she hit the cold air of the December street, and then she stopped and tipped her head back and breathed it in the way you breathe when you've been inside a pressurized space for too long. Do-hyun came out behind her. His car was at the curb with Park behind the wheel. She turned around. She's going to help you. Yes. My mother, who you lied to for 4 months, is going to use her legal contacts to facilitate your cooperation with federal law enforcement. She said this with the slightly stunned quality of someone narrating something they are watching happen. She moved faster on that than I did. She is a litigation attorney, Do-hyun said. She sees a case. She builds toward the resolution. It's what she does. She's doing it for me. She's doing it for you, he agreed. Zuri looked at him on the cold December sidewalk with the Seoul traffic moving around them and the building above them containing her mother and a folder that was going to change the shape of the next several months significantly. She looked at him the way she had been looking at him since the bookstore, the way that had started as assessment and had become something that didn't have a clean professional name. What happens now? She said. Now Park drives us somewhere that is not here, he said. Tonight, I have work to do. Tomorrow, I sit down with your mother and her contact at the NPA, and I tell them everything I have. After that, he paused. After that, the shape of things changes. How they change depends on decisions that are not entirely mine. The organization, she said. Yes. What does cooperating with law enforcement mean for it? It means some things end, he said. Some things change form. Some people who have been working in a particular way will need to work in a different way or stop working for me. It is a significant restructuring. He said it with the flat clarity of someone who has already done this calculation and has passed the emotional weight of it and into the logistics. I have been in this business for 15 years. I know which parts of it I will not miss. She looked at him. And which parts you will. The clarity, he said immediately. The particular clarity of a world with clean edges. Of knowing exactly who is against you and exactly what they are capable of. The civilian world is less clean. He paused. But it has other qualities. Like what? Like bookstores, he said. Like Thursday phone calls about soup. Like an architect who reorganizes her priorities in real time and delivers a community center presentation on the worst morning of her month because the building needs to exist. The corner of his mouth, the almost smile that had its own vocabulary by now. I would like to see what I'm like in a world that has those things in it and does not have the other things. She looked at him for a long moment, and what she was looking at was not the man from the airport, not the performance of a private equity executive, not the controlled stillness of a crime lord managing a crisis. She was looking at the man in the bookstore, the one who reorganized the architecture section because the disorder bothered him, the one who talked to a 74-year-old woman about stairs and soup for 40 minutes because she needed someone who wouldn't worry at her. Okay, she said. Okay. Park, she called toward the car. The window came down. Park's face, professionally neutral as always, with something around the edges of it that 11 years had not entirely trained out. Where to? Park said. Zuri looked at Do-hyun. The Galbatang place, she said. The one in Mapo. Grandma Rose wants me to learn how to make it before March, and I have been avoiding it because the recipe has 14 steps. Park looked at Do-hyun. The Galbatang place, Do-hyun confirmed. They got in the car. It pulled into traffic, moving through the December city, and 4 blocks into the drive, Do Hyun's phone began ringing. The secure line, not the regular one. And he looked at the screen and his jaw went tight in the particular way that meant it was not Park calling, and it was not Zuri's mother, and it was not anyone operating on his side of anything. He answered. He said nothing. He listened for 8 seconds, and Zuri, watching him from the seat next to him, watched his face do the controlled inward thing it did when a new variable had just entered a calculation he had considered settled. He said 2 words in Korean, flat, definitive, and hung up. Lee, she said. Not a question. He knows about your mother's contact at the NPA, Do Hyun said. He has a source inside the Financial Crimes Division. He knows she called him this afternoon. His voice was even, but underneath the even was something running very fast. Something she had not heard in it before. He's moving tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight. Park's eyes in the rearview mirror, already recalibrating. Do Hyun. Change of destination, Do Hyun said. And call the others. Everyone. I want everyone on position in the next 2 hours. What does that mean, Zuri said. Tonight means what exactly? He turned to look at her, and his face was the face of a man who has 2 versions of himself running simultaneously and is deciding, in real time, which one gets to speak. It means Lee has decided that if he can't use you as leverage, Do Hyun said, he is going to remove the thing that makes you leverageable. He held her gaze. He's coming for me tonight, and he knows that the documentation your mother has makes tonight the last window he has to do it before the NPA inquiry absorbs everything and his opportunity is gone. The car was moving fast through the city. Outside the windows, Seoul ran past in the particular blur of a place that does not stop for anyone's crisis, indifferent and enormous, and lit up in the early dark of December. Where are we going? Zuri said. Somewhere safe, Do Hyun said. For you, for your mother. Park is calling her now. He was already on his own phone. I need you to do exactly what I tell you for the next 3 hours, and I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing, and I need you not to argue with me about it until after. She looked at him. And you. He was already composing the message he was sending, his thumb moving over the screen with the controlled efficiency of someone who has trained for exactly this. I'm going to go end this, he said, without looking up. Tonight. Do Hyun, Zuri? He looked at her. His eyes were completely clear and completely certain. I told you I would handle it. I am going to handle it. A pause. Trust me for 3 hours. She looked at him for one long second. At the face she had learned, at the man in the bookstore underneath the man in the convoy, at the person who had stood next to her in an airport and given her 40 minutes of something real enough that a grandmother had known the difference. 3 hours, she said. He nodded. Then he turned back to his phone, and Park accelerated, and the city moved around them in its enormous indifference. And somewhere in it, Lee Sang-wook was making the last move of a game he had been playing for 8 months, and Do Hyun was already 3 moves past where Lee thought he was, because that was the only way he had ever known how to survive anything. And tonight, survival was going to cost something, and the only question left was, the question that had no ending got its answer at 11:43 that night, when Do Hyun walked through the door of the apartment in Mapo, where Park had taken Zuri 4 hours earlier, and she knew from the way he walked that it was over and that the cost of it was written somewhere on him, even if she couldn't see exactly where yet. He was not bleeding. She checked for that first, the way you check for the most urgent thing before you allow yourself to check for anything else. His suit was intact, his hands were clean, his face was the face she knew, controlled, placed, specific. But there was something underneath the control that was different from anything she had seen in it before. Not damage exactly. The particular exhaustion of a man who has finished something that required the full weight of everything he had, and is now standing in a room without that weight for the first time in a very long time, and does not yet know what his posture is without it. He sat down on the couch. He did not take off his jacket. He sat with his forearms on his knees and his hands loosely clasped, and he looked at the middle distance for a moment in the way a person looks at something that is not in the room. Zuri sat across from him and did not speak because she had learned his silences well enough to know which ones wanted filling and which ones needed to finish themselves. After a moment he said, Lee is in custody. His people moved on the warehouse in Yeongdeungpo, where we had the documentation staged. Park had already moved the documentation. What they found instead was a clean building and a coordinated response from people who had been positioned since 8 o'clock. He paused. The NPA Financial Crimes Unit executed their warrant simultaneously. Adaeze's contact had the referral processed in 4 hours, that is fast. That is extraordinarily fast for a federal instrument. She called in 20 years of favors, Zuri said. Yes, he said. I understand that now. He looked at his hands. 3 of Lee's senior people were taken in the warehouse. Lee himself was apprehended at the port in Incheon at 10:15, attempting to leave the country. The charges are financial crimes, racketeering, infiltration of a competing organization. It will take months to process, but he is contained. Zuri exhaled. Not a dramatic exhale, a small one, the kind that is the body releasing something it has been holding at a specific tension and is only now allowed to set down. And Min-jun? Gone, Do-hyun said. I don't know where. I gave him 12 hours and he used them. He's not my problem to find. He paused. He'll surface somewhere. People always do. And your people, Zuri said, the ones at the warehouse. Safe, he said. Everyone is accounted for. He looked up at her then, for the first time since he'd sat down, and the look had the quality of something that had been waiting to happen and was now happening. Park has a cut on his forearm. He won't tell me how bad it is, and he dismissed the medical team, which means it's not bad enough to argue about, but probably bad enough that he should have let them look at it. That sounds like Park. Yes, he said, the corner of his mouth, the almost smile. It does. She looked at him for a moment. Do-hyun, are you okay? He considered the question with the same seriousness he applied to everything. I don't know yet, he said. Ask me in a few days. It was the most honest answer he had ever given her, which was saying something, and she recognized it as such. Okay, she said. In a few days. Adaeze came to the apartment at 8 the next morning with 2 cups of coffee from the place on the corner and the expression of a woman who has not slept but has been productive in the hours she was awake, which was Adaeze's version of recovery. She sat at Zuri's drafting table. The site plans had been moved, finally, to make room, and set the coffees down and looked at Do-hyun across the small apartment with the clear-eyed assessment that had never, even at its most hostile, been anything but genuine. I spoke to my contact at the NPA at midnight, she said, and again at 6 this morning. They have what they need on Lee. The offshore documentation closes the layer they were missing. She wrapped her hands around her coffee. They want to speak with you, formally, not as a suspect, as a cooperating source. There's a significant difference in how that conversation goes and what it produces. I know, Do-hyun said. I'll meet with them. I'll be present, Adaeze said. As your attorney, if you want that. As an observer, if you don't. But I'll be present. Do-hyun looked at her. Why? Adaeze looked back at him with the expression of someone who has made a decision they are not entirely comfortable with and has made it anyway because the alternative was worse. Because my daughter has chosen you, she said. Plainly and clearly and with full knowledge of what that choice involves, which is more than I can say for most people who make similar choices. And because I have spent 30 years watching Zuri Bennett commit completely to things she believes in, and I have never once seen her be wrong about the things worth committing to. She paused. I have also reviewed the full documentation you provided, and I have formed this professional opinion that a man who has spent 2 years quietly building the evidentiary basis for a federal referral while running an organization that could have destroyed that evidence in 48 hours is a man who was already on his way somewhere before any of this began. She picked up her coffee. I'd like to help him get there faster. The apartment was quiet. Outside the window, the Seoul morning was beginning its indifferent operations, cold and bright, the sky a clear, hard blue. I have conditions, Do-hyun said. I expected you would, Adaeze said. The men who work for me, the ones who have operated in good faith and have no independent criminal exposure beyond organizational affiliation. I want the cooperation framework to protect them where possible. Not immunity, but consideration. They made choices within a structure I created. That structure is changing because of decisions I made. They shouldn't absorb consequences that belong to me. Adaeze looked at him for a moment. That's going to be a complex negotiation. I know. That's why I need an attorney who can conduct a complex negotiation. Something shifted in Adeye's face. Something that was not yet warm, but was no longer cold. The specific temperature of a woman who has been given a reason to work with someone and has decided, provisionally, to use it. I'll need full disclosure, she said. Everything, not the curated version. Yesterday I told you everything, he said. Today I can provide the documentation. I'll also need you to understand, she said, that this process is going to take time, months, possibly longer. During that time, you will be in a position of significant legal uncertainty. The organization, in its current form, cannot continue operating while you are a cooperating source in an active federal inquiry. You understand that? Yes, he said. The financial restructuring alone. I have people who handle that kind of transition, he said. Legal people. I have maintained a parallel legitimate business infrastructure for 2 years specifically against the possibility of this moment. The transition will be significant. It will not be unmanaged. Adeze looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Zuri, who was sitting on the couch with both hands around her own coffee, watching this exchange with the expression of someone witnessing something they had not quite allowed themselves to hope for. You've been planning this, Zuri said to Do-hyun. Not since last week. Not since I got involved. You've been planning this. For 2 years, he said, the documentation, the legal infrastructure, the legitimate business parallel. It was not a fast decision, and it was not a simple one. But yes. What made you start? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the woman who left. She said I was always partly somewhere else. She was right. And she was right because the somewhere else I was partly in was a version of this. A future that did not involve managing threats and covering exposure and conducting business in rooms that don't officially exist. He looked at his hands. She left before I could build it. That is perhaps the correct order of events. I don't know that I would have built it with the same clarity if she had stayed. A pause. And then a woman grabbed my arm in an airport, and I found out that the fictional husband she'd invented had my exact name, and it seemed, at the time, like the kind of coincidence that deserved to be honored. Zuri looked at him. You honor coincidences. I honor things that are worth honoring, he said. I've learned to tell the difference. Adeze set down her coffee. All right, she said, in the voice that closed the personal portion of a conversation and opened the professional one. I'll call my contact this morning and arrange a preliminary meeting. We'll need 3 to 5 days to prepare the disclosure package properly. In the meantime, she looked at Do-hyun. In the meantime, nothing moves operationally. Nothing. You are completely still until I tell you otherwise. Understood, he said. She stood. She picked up her coat. At the door she paused, and she turned back and looked at the two of them. Her daughter on the couch with her coffee and her bracelet, and this man across the room who was not what she had planned for and was apparently not going anywhere. And her face did the thing it had been building toward for the past 16 hours, which was not forgiveness exactly and not acceptance exactly, but the thing that contains the seeds of both, and that only a mother's face can do, which is the thing of loving someone so completely that you will walk into the room with the thing that frightens you most on their behalf. The galbatang, she said. Are you actually learning to make it? Zuri blinked. What? You told your grandmother you were going to learn before March. I've been a little busy. The recipe has 14 steps, Do-hyun said. We were going to start last night before the situation changed. Adeze looked at him. Do you actually know how to make it? I researched it thoroughly, he said. That's not the same as knowing. No, he said. It isn't. Adeze looked at them both for a moment with the compressed entirety of everything this morning contained. Then she said, Sunday, my apartment. I'll make it. You'll both watch and you'll learn it properly, and you won't tell your grandmother that I'm the one who taught you. She picked up her bag. One more thing. She looked at Do-hyun with the clear-eyed directness that was the most consistent thing about her. My mother is coming in March. When she comes, you will tell her the truth about how you met. The full truth. The airport, the arm-grabbing, all of it. Not because she doesn't already know. She may already know, she usually does. but because she deserves to have it said out loud by people who are no longer afraid of saying it. Yes, Do-hyun said. I know. Good. She opened the door. Call me at 9. She left. The door closed. The apartment went quiet in the way apartments go quiet after a force of nature has passed through them. Zuri looked at Do-hyun. She's going to cook for us. Yes. She doesn't cook for people she hasn't decided about. I know, he said. She told me that. While you were getting coffee. Zuri stared at him. You and my mother had a sidebar. She had questions she didn't want to ask in front of you. What questions? He looked at her steadily. She asked if I understood what it would cost to be part of this family. The scrutiny, the history, the expectations. She said, we don't do things quietly, and we don't forgive easily, and we love in a way that requires things from people. He paused. I told her I had not previously had much experience of being required things from by people who were not professional associates. She said, does that frighten you? I told her, somewhat. She said, good answer. Zuri stared at him for a moment longer. Then she put her face in her hands and laughed. A real one, the kind that had been compressed through too many difficult hours, and was now coming out with the particular force of something long delayed. It lasted about 10 seconds, and when it finished she was still smiling, which was the first time in about 36 hours that the smile had felt like its own thing rather than something she was managing. Do-hyun, she said. Yes, when this is over, the NPA meetings, the disclosure, the restructuring, all of it, when it's actually over and the shape of things has settled. She looked at him. What do you want? He was quiet for a moment, and she let him be quiet because the question was genuine and deserved a genuine answer rather than a fast one. I want the bookstore, he said. I want Thursday phone calls that are about soup and not about operational security. I want to see the Yongsan Community Center when it's finished, and the library if that proposal goes through, and whatever you build after that. Well, I'm a coming, man. He paused. I want to meet your grandmother at an airport where I am not running a performance, and I want to tell her everything, and I want to see what her face does. He looked at his hands again, then back at her. I want to see what I'm like when the thing I'm managing is a life rather than a threat landscape. I don't know what that version of me looks like. I'm interested to find out. She looked at him across the quiet apartment, and what she saw was the man she had been looking at since a Tuesday afternoon in September. Not the convoy, not the bodyguards, not the controlled stillness of someone who has spent 15 years being the most dangerous person in every room, but the man underneath all of that. The one who reorganized bookstores and researched galbatang recipes and talked to old women about stairs. The one who had told her the truth every single time she had asked for it. The one who had given her grandmother 40 minutes of something real enough that a wise woman had given him a family heirloom in return. I know what that version of you looks like, she said. He looked at her. I've been watching him for 5 months, she said. He shows up when it matters. He doesn't leave when things get hard. He reorganizes things that are in disorder because the disorder bothers him. She leaned forward. He's going to need to learn to exist in a world that is messier than he's used to, and louder, and that involves a mother-in-law who will always be 3 questions ahead of him and a grandmother who already knows everything before anyone tells her. She paused. But he's going to be okay. I'm fairly certain. Something in his face opened fully for the first time. Not the almost smile, not the adjacent warmth, but something that was simply itself, uncontrolled, the expression of a man who has been behind glass for a very long time and has just felt air on his face. Fairly certain, he said. I'm an architect, she said. I don't overclaim the structural assessment. March came in the way March comes to Seoul. Tentative at first, then sudden. The city moving from the hard cold of winter into something softer over the course of a week, the cherry trees in Yeouido beginning the slow preparatory work that would eventually produce the 3 weeks of brief, indifferent beauty that the city built its spring around. Rose Bennett arrived on a Thursday, which she had chosen deliberately because she had been calling Do-hyun on Thursdays for 4 months, and she said it seemed fitting to arrive on one. She came through the arrivals hall at Incheon with her small carry-on and her yellow cardigan. A different yellow, this time, brighter, like the spring was dressing her. and she scanned the crowd with her quick dark eyes and found them immediately, as if she had never not known where to look. Do-hyun was the one who moved toward her first. Zuri watched him close the distance in 3 even steps, the same way he had the first time, and she watched her grandmother take his hands and look up at his face and say something too quiet to carry across the arrivals hall, and she watched him answer, and she watched Rose's face do the thing it had done in the restaurant. The complete stillness followed by the rearrangement into something new, but different this time, because this time whatever he was saying was not a performance, and Rose could tell, because Rose always could tell. When Zuri reached them, Rose was still holding Do-hyun's hands and looking at him with the expression of a woman who has been given information she already had and is glad to have it confirmed. "He told me," Rose said when Zuri arrived. "The airport, the arm grabbing, all of it." "I know," Zuri said. "We decided—" "I knew," Rose said. "I want you to know that I knew. I knew inside the first 5 minutes. The way he didn't know your middle name. The way he listened to everything I said like he was filing it rather than remembering it." She looked at Zuri with the warm iron warmth that was the most characteristic thing about her. "I also knew something else inside the first 5 minutes." "What?" Zuri said. "That he was going to be real eventually," Rose said. "I just needed to give it room." She released Do-hyun's hands and took Zuri's face in both of hers, the hands that were smaller than Zuri remembered and stronger than they looked, and looked at her daughter's daughter for a long and serious moment. "The bracelet," she said. Zuri's wrist, the gold warm from her skin that had been there since September. "I didn't give that to a lie," Rose said. "I want to be clear about that. I gave that to a man who stood next to you and did not leave. The story around it was wrong. What I was looking at was not." She released Zuri's face and took one step back and looked at both of them together, and her expression was the expression of a woman who has been paying attention for 74 years and has gotten very good at knowing when she has seen something worth seeing. "Now, this man has been promising me galbatang for 4 months. I would like to collect. It's a might." Adaeze had made it on Sunday, as promised, and Zuri and Do-hyun had stood in her kitchen and learned it properly. The long soak, the blanching, the exact timing of when to add what. The 14 steps that turned out to be less about technique and more about patience, about being willing to let something develop at the pace it needed rather than the pace you wanted. Do-hyun had taken notes in the methodical way he took notes on everything that mattered to him. Adaeze had watched him take notes and had said nothing, but her mouth had done the thing that mouths do when someone does exactly what you hoped they'd do before you knew you were hoping for it. He made it himself, for Rose, the Friday after she arrived. He stood in the kitchen of the apartment, the real apartment, not the 4-bedroom fiction, the actual apartment he had found in Mapo 3 weeks after the NPA process began, close enough to Zuri's that the walk between them took 7 minutes on a slow morning, and he stood at the stove and followed the 14 steps with the careful attention of a man who understands that some things cannot be expedited and do not benefit from optimization, and the apartment filled with the smell of it, and Rose sat at the kitchen table and talked to him about her husband and about Lagos in the 1970s, and about the restaurant in New York that she could now name, and Do-hyun listened the way he always listened, completely, with nothing held back for perimeter assessment, because the perimeter had changed, and the thing worth protecting was now inside the room rather than outside it. The process with the NPA took 4 months. Adaeze was present for every meeting, as promised, and she conducted the disclosure with the focused ruthlessness of someone who had spent 20 years ensuring that the story told was the complete story. And Do-hyun gave them everything, and the conversations were long and sometimes brutal and required him to sit across from people who looked at him with the particular look that law enforcement reserves for people in his position and to absorb that look without flinching, which he did, because flinching had never been available to him, and this was no different except that on the other side of it was something different from what had always been there before. Park took the cooperative disclosure framework and used it to facilitate the transition of 3 of the organization's legitimate subsidiary businesses into independent structures, fully legal, with new management and clean financial histories, and no organizational threads to anything that had come before. He stayed on as the managing director of one of them, the logistics consulting firm, which turned out to have been genuinely profitable on its own merits and did not require illegal activity to sustain itself, only someone who understood operations. He called Do-hyun once a week. He never called it a check-in. He called it a logistics review. Lee Sang-wook was indicted on 14 counts. The trial was scheduled for 8 months out. Do-hyun was listed as a cooperating source and not as a defendant, which Adaeze had negotiated with the particular tenacity of someone who understood that the difference between those two designations was the difference between two very different futures, and who had decided that one of those futures was worth fighting for. The Yongsan Community Center broke ground in April. Zuri was at the site when it happened, standing in the mud in her steel-toed boots with the project drawings under her arm, watching the first machines move into position. And Do-hyun was next to her because she had called him at 7 that morning and said, "The groundbreaking is at 9. You don't have to come, but I want you to see it." And he had been there at 8:45 because he was always exactly where he said he would be at the time he said he would be there, which was one of the things she had learned about him that turned out to be both a professional habit and a personal one, indistinguishable from each other, which was the most characteristic thing about him. He stood next to her in the mud and watched the machines work and said nothing for a long time. And then he said, "How long until it's finished?" 14 months, she said. "If everything goes to schedule." "It won't all go to schedule," he said. "No," she agreed. "Some of it will be harder than estimated. Some things always are." He looked at her sideways with the look that had started as assessment and had been something else for several months now. "Are we still talking about the building?" "We're always talking about the building," she said. "And also the other thing. They're not that different." He looked back at the site. The machines were doing their work with the particular mechanical indifference of things that do not care about the significance of what they are beginning. The soul spring was coming in around them, irreversible, the kind that doesn't ask permission. "Zuri May Bennett," he said. "Kang Do-hyun," she said. "I would like to stop borrowing time, Risan," he said. "At some point, when the process is done and the shape of things has settled, I would like to stop operating in increments and build something." She looked at him. He was not looking at her, still looking at the site, which was the way he said things that required more than his usual precision. Sideways, without the full weight of his gaze, because some things were too specifically weighted to be said directly, and he was still learning the vocabulary of it. "Something," she said. "Are you going to be more specific than that?" "A life," he said. "Specifically, the kind with 14 steps and a patient approach and all the things that cannot be expedited." He paused. "I would like to do it correctly, with the right timing, the way you'd want it." She looked at him for a moment, at his profile, at the set of his jaw, at the man who had walked out of a convoy for a cup of coffee and had instead walked into the longest and most significant Tuesday of his life. And she thought about an airport and a bracelet and a grandmother who had seen through a lie in 5 minutes and given her most precious thing anyway. And she thought about a bookstore with bad lighting and a disorganized architecture section. And she thought about 14 steps, and the smell of galbatang, and Thursdays, and the specific texture of a silence that is chosen rather than empty. "The right timing," she said, "is when it's ready. Not before, not after." "How will I know?" "You'll know," she said. "You know the architecture of things. You always know when the load-bearing structure is in place." He turned to look at her then, fully, with the full unguarded weight of it, the thing that had been looking for a name since September, and had been quietly naming itself without permission in the intervening months. "Is it in place?" he said. She held his gaze. "Yes," she said. "Has been for a while." He nodded once. Then he looked back at the site, and she looked back at the site, and around them the soul spring moved through its business with its particular indifferent beauty, the city enormous and continuing, and the machines began the first real work of a building that would eventually stand in a neighborhood and be useful to the people who lived there, built by someone who had always been more interested in useful than impressive. And next to her stood a man who had spent 15 years being impressive in the most dangerous possible way and had decided at some point that was difficult to pinpoint precisely that useful was what he wanted to be. The groundbreaking took 40 minutes, which was, in the private accounting of two people who knew what 40 minutes could cost and what it could build, exactly the right amount of time. Rose Bennett flew home 2 weeks after she arrived, on a Thursday, at a gate in Terminal 1 at Incheon that was 4 gates down from the one where she had arrived 7 months earlier, with a layover and a yellow cardigan and a bracelet she had been keeping warm for the right moment. She hugged Zuri for a long time at the security line, and she hugged her the way you hug someone when you are 74 and you know that the number of times you will stand in airports with this person is a number you cannot see the end of, and so you hold the one in front of you with the full weight of all of them. Then she turned to Do-hyun and she took both his hands again, the way she had in the arrivals hall, and she looked up at him with the eyes that had been paying attention since before either of them was born. "You made the galbatang wrong," she said. He looked at her. "I followed every step." "You rushed the soak," she said. 20 minutes less than it needed. "I didn't say anything because the effort was sincere and the flavor was close, and you'll do it right next time." She squeezed his hands once. "There will be a next time." "Yes," he said. "There will be many next times," she said. "I intend to collect all of them." She released his hands and picked up her carry-on and looked at both of them together one more time with the expression that she had been refining her entire life. The expression that contained everything a woman can accumulate over 7 decades of paying attention and loving people completely and knowing the difference between what a person performs and what a person is. "Stop standing at the edge of it," she said to both of them, to neither of them, to the specific thing between them that had been building since a Tuesday in September and was now standing in an airport with its full weight visible. "You've been circling long enough. Go build the thing." Then she turned and walked through security, and the line moved her forward, and at the last moment before the corridor took her, she looked back and pressed 2 fingers to her lips, and Zuri pressed 2 fingers to hers, and Do-hyun watched the gesture pass between them. The 30-year language of it, the intimacy of a family's private alphabet, and he felt the exact weight of being inside something that had not been built for him and had made room for him anyway, which was the specific feeling of being, after a very long time of standing outside things, home. The security line moved. The yellow cardigan disappeared around the corner. Zuri stood with the bracelet warm on her wrist and the spring air moving through the terminal's automatic doors each time they opened. And next to her stood a man who had given 40 minutes to a stranger and had not, in the 7 months since, found a reason to stop. And she understood that this was what it looked like when something real had been built from nothing. Not smooth, not clean, not without cost, but standing, load-bearing, capable of holding what was put inside it. "Come on," she said. "Where?" he said. "The bookstore," she said. "The architecture section needs to be checked. You reorganized it 6 months ago, and I want to see if it held." He looked at her with the full, unguarded thing that still didn't have a clean name and didn't need one. "It held," he said. "Humor me," she said. "I like to verify the structure." He fell into step beside her, and the terminal moved around them in its indifferent noise, and they walked out into the Seoul Spring with its cherry trees and its cold, clean air and its enormous continuing life, and the 40 minutes that had started everything expanded, as real things do, into all the time that comes after.